42. More and more unfamiliar faces came from outside the town, and the business of the inns and restaurants flourished. At the same time, in Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley, many of the younger generation of the noble families began to quietly leave the small town. Most of them were young and intelligent, but there were also the sons of concubines, or the sons of loyal servants. Zhao Yarrow, the son of a noble family, was among them. As for the child Jiu Can from Clay Bottle Alley, he was chosen by Liu Zhimao at first glance, so he was an exception. Chen Pinggan went to Liu Xianyang's house to get a basket of fish and left the small town for the stream. When there were many people, Chen Pinggan naturally would not practice the quaking mountain atlas walking stance. Once he was out of the small town and there was no one around, Chen Pinggan began to recite the incantation, recalling Miss Ning's steps, posture, and aura. He did not want to miss a single detail and repeated the 6 steps over and over. When Chen Pinggan imitated Ning Yarrow for the first time in the house in Clay Bottle Alley, it was so clumsy and funny that it was worse than ordinary people. In fact, there was a misunderstanding between the young man and the girl. Chen Pinggan always knew that he had a problem. Since he started working in the porcelain kiln, he realized that his eyes were bad, but his hands were slow. To be precise, it was because the young man's eyes and eyesight were too brilliant that his hands and feet could not keep up. This meant that if someone else were to imitate Ning Yarrow's hand manual, they might be 30 to 40% similar, but at least they would not be 30 to 20% similar to Chen Pinggan's. This was precisely because Chen Pinggan saw it too clearly and was too strict with every step. When his hands and feet could not keep up, it seemed particularly funny. Moreover, under the 90% difference, there was a precious divine resemblance. Ning Yarrow did not know this. Even if the hand manual was 90% similar, it would not be as good as a divine resemblance. Of course, Ning Yarrow wouldn't be surprised even if she was 70 to 80% similar, not to mention that she only resembled Ning Yarrow a little. In Ning Yarrow's eyes, there was only the remote martial path, the people who stood side by side, and the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Chen Pinggan sat on the steps under the covered bridge and rested. The young man roughly calculated that there were 24 hours in a day. Even if he practiced the hand manual repeatedly for 10 to 12 hours, he would only be able to do about 300 times. 100,000 times a year, 10 years would be 10 years. The young man turned his head to look at the clear stream and murmured, "It should be possible for me to persist for 10 years, right?" Although Chen Pinggan did not reveal any strange emotions during this period, Lu Daozhong revealed the heaven's secret before he left and exposed Cai Qinqian's sinister methods one by one. This still made the young man feel heavy. There was one thing that Chen Pinggan did not mention to Lu Daozhong and Miss Ning. After Cai Qinqian poked him between the eyebrows and patted his chest, the young man had already vaguely felt that something was wrong with his body in the Mud Bottle Alley. That was why he had stayed in front of his own courtyard for so long. He wanted to make up his mind to fight Cai Qinqian, no matter what. After all, at that time, Chen Pinggan, according to the young Taoist Lu Chen, was too lifeless. He was not at all like a young man who should be full of vitality. When it came to matters of life and death, Chen Pinggan treated them with less importance than most people. Cai Qinqian used martial arts to guide the young man in straw sandals to forcefully open his acupoints. This caused Chen Pinggan's body to be like a house without a courtyard or door. It was true that he could move in and absorb more things, but every time there was a storm, the house would collapse extremely quickly. That was why Lu Chen said that if there were no exceptions and there were no major illnesses or disasters, Chen Pinggan could only live to 30 or 40 years old. After that, she patted Chen Pinggan's chest and destroyed the foundation of his cultivation. The heart was the key to a cultivator. After the city gate collapsed, Cai Qinqian had basically sealed off the normal operation of this pass. Not only did she cut off Chen Pinggan's cultivation path, but she also accelerated the decay of Chen Pinggan's body. Cai Qinqian's 2 moves were truly terrifying after the door was opened. On one hand, Chen Pinggan could no longer cultivate the method of immortality. This meant that he could no longer use spells and supernatural powers to repair the door and strengthen his foundation. On the other hand, even if the young man was lucky enough to reach a higher level in martial arts and could indeed rely on refining his body to strengthen his body, for Chen Pinggan, huge risks would always be accompanied by opportunities. If he was not careful, he would be trapped in the cycle of practicing external martial arts can easily attract evil spirits. He would not only fail to prolong his life, but also end up dying early. The urgent matter at hand was that Chen Pinggan needed a martial art that could nourish his vitality. Whether or not the moves of this martial art were fierce and overbearing, and whether or not it would allow one's martial arts realm to advance by leaps and bounds, was instead not important. Chen Pinggan's hope was all on the Book of Shaking Mountains that Ning Yaro did not like. For example, she said that after the walking stance, there was the sword furnace, and the 1,000 years of the sleeping stance. However, Chen Pinggan did not dare to practice carelessly. At that time, he only glanced at it a few times and resisted the urge to flip through it. He felt that he should let Miss Ning appraise it and confirm that there was no mistake before he started practicing. As long as one walked on the right path, no matter how bad one's comprehension was, as long as one was diligent and tenacious enough, one would eventually improve every day. If one walked on the wrong path, the smarter one was, the more one worked, the more mistakes one would make. These words were said by Liu Xianyang. Of course, his focus was on the last sentence. You, Chen Pinggan, are the first type of person. That sly ghost song is the second type. Only I, Liu Xianyang, am the type of person who is smart and walks on the right path. At that time, when Liu Xianyang was boasting and praising himself, he was accidentally heard by old man Yarrow who was passing by. Liu Xianyang had always looked up to the old man and regarded him as a proud disciple. It was not known which sentence of the young man poked the old man's sore spot. Old man Yarrow flew into a rage and chased after Liu Xianyang and gave him a violent beating. Anyway, after that, Liu Xianyang never said the word genius again. Chen Pinggan exhaled heavily, stood up and walked up the high steps. After entering the corridor of the covered bridge, he discovered that there was a group of people gathered in the distance. There were 4 or 5 people standing, as if they were guarding a woman. Chen Pinggan could only see the side of the woman's body. He saw that she was sitting on the railing of the covered bridge, her legs naturally hanging above the surface of the stream. Her eyes were closed as she rested. The 5 fingers of her hands were in a strange position, with her fingers intertwined or bent. Chen Pinggan felt that although her eyes were closed, she seemed to be looking at something attentively. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment and did not continue forward. He turned and walked down the steps, planning to wade across the stream and find Liu Xianyang. Today, he was carrying 2 wicker baskets, one big and one small. He wanted to return the smaller wicker basket to Master Wan's blacksmith shop. After all, Liu Xianyang had borrowed it from someone. Far away from the covered bridge, the group of people smiled at each other after seeing the shabbily dressed young man turn around. They did not say anything as they were afraid of disturbing the mysterious water view state of mind of the woman of the same age. The root of this dharma originated from Buddhism. This was without a doubt. However, it was later adopted, selected, integrated, and refined by many cultivation sects. In the end, it was divided into many smaller paths. However, the Eastern Vase continent had always been regarded as the last place of Buddhism. After several Buddha annihilation catastrophes that affected half of the continent's territory, the Dharma of Buddhism had been declining for nearly 1,000 years. Its influence was far inferior to the Confucianism and Taoism of the 3 sects. I've only heard of Zhenjuan and Taoist master, but I don't know about Dharma protector and Vedanta. This was the true situation of the Eastern Vase continent. However, there were indeed countless celestial sects that benefited from the Dharma of Buddhism. Chen Pinggan rolled up his trousers and waded across the stream. Suddenly, he heard cries and angry shouts from the other side of the covered bridge. He thought for a moment and decided not to get involved. When he arrived at Master Wan's blacksmith shop, the scene was still in full swing. Chen Pinggan did not wander around. He stood beside a well and asked someone to help inform Liu Xianyang. He thought that he would have to wait for a long time, but Liu Xianyang ran over quickly and pulled him to the stream. He lowered his voice and said, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. Why are you only here now?" Chen Pinggan wondered, "Did Master Wan ask you to return the wicker basket?" The tall teenager rolled his eyes and said, "What's the value of a broken wicker basket? I have something important to tell you. After you pick up the stones and return to my house, wait for that madam to come to you. She's the woman whose son is wearing red clothes. We saw the mother and son at the entrance of Mud Bottle Alley last time. When she comes, don't say anything. Just give her the big box and she'll give you a bag of money. Remember to count it in person. There are 25 copper coins, not one less." Chen Pinggan was shocked and said, "Liu Xianyang, are you crazy? Why would you sell your belongings to an outsider?" Liu Xianyang hugged the neck of the teenager and stared at him. He lectured, "What do you know? There's a great future in front of me. Why would I let it go?" Chen Pinggan's face was full of doubt. He didn't believe that this was Liu Xianyang's true intention. Liu Xianyang sighed and whispered, "That madam wants to buy my family's ancestral armor. The other master and servant want a sword manual. Before my grandfather died, he told me that if there's no other way, I can sell the armor. Of course, I can't sell it cheaply. But the sword manual, even if I die, I can't admit that it's in my old Liu's house." I agreed to sell the armor to that madam. Other than negotiating the price, I also asked her to agree to a condition. After she gets the armor, she has to persuade that burly old man to not cause trouble for me in the near future. It's a delaying tactic. When I become Master Wan's disciple, these things won't be a problem anymore. Chen Pinggan asked directly, "Why don't you delay that madam? Do you think she'll come to the blacksmith shop and cause trouble for you? Besides, it's not like she can break in and steal your precious armor." Liu Xianyang let go of his hand and squatted by the stream. He threw a stone into the stream and curled his lips. "Anyway, it's not that I can't sell the armor. Now that there's a fair price, isn't it good? It also makes things more stable. Maybe Miss Ning won't have to take the risk. So, I don't think it's bad." Chen Pinggan also squatted down and urged, "How do you know that the price she's offering is fair? What if you regret it in the future?" The tall teenager turned his head and grinned. "Regret? Think about it. We've known each other for so many years. When have I, Liu Xianyang, ever done anything that I regret?" Chen Pinggan scratched his head. He felt that something was wrong. But the teenager was clumsy and didn't know how to persuade Liu Xianyang. Liu Xianyang had always lived a carefree life. It seemed that he had never been troubled by anything. There was never a knot in his heart that couldn't be untied or something that couldn't be done. Liu Xianyang stood up and kicked the basket on the teenager's back. "Hurry up. I'm going to return it to Master Wan. When I get back, I'll formally become his disciple and offer tea. You can come and broaden your horizons." Chen Pinggan slowly stood up. He wanted to say something but stopped. Liu Xianyang laughed and scolded, "Chen Pinggan, your uncle. What I'm selling is your family heirloom? Or your wife?" When Chen Pinggan passed the basket to him, he asked tentatively, "You don't want to think about it?" Liu Xianyang took the basket and took a few steps back. Without any warning, he jumped high and did a fancy roundhouse kick. After landing steadily, Liu Xianyang was proud. He smiled and asked, "Amazing, right? Are you scared?" Chen Pinggan angrily replied, "Your uncle." After leaving the Ron shop, Chen Pinggan went into the water to pick up stones. He didn't know if it was because he was uneasy or because the water level in the stream had dropped, but he didn't get much today. By the time Chen Pinggan reached the covered bridge, he had only picked up 20 or so snake gall stones. Moreover, none of them could make people's eyes light up and fall in love at first sight. Chen Pinggan took down the basket of fish and placed them in the grass by the stream. He took a deep breath and turned around in the stream to practice his walking stance. After a round trip, Chen Pinggan's heart tightened. He saw a short boy squatting at the place where the basket of fish was hidden. He had a green dog's tail grass in his mouth. He was the grandson of Granny Ma from Apricot Blossom Lane. He had been treated as a fool since he was young. In addition, Chen Pinggan's impression of Granny Ma was very bad. She was stingy and mean. She had caused her precious grandson to be used as a punching bag. Every time the boy went out, he would be chased and bullied. Every time he wore new clothes and boots, within an hour, he would be covered in dust by his peers or older teenagers. Imagine, a pair of brand new boots that Granny Ma had just bought from the shop. After the grandson wore them out, he was immediately stepped on by a dozen people. When the child returned home, how new could the boots be? This silly boy, whose real name was Ma Ku-shen, had long been forgotten. He had always been very strange. When he was bullied, he never took the initiative to complain to Granny Ma. He also never cried or begged for pity. He always had a very calm face and indifferent eyes. Therefore, the children in Apricot Blossom Lane did not like to play with this little fool. Ma Ku-shen had learned to play by himself very early on. He liked to watch the clouds in the sky from the slope or the roof. Chen Ping'an had never bullied Ma Ku-shen. He had also never pitied this fellow of the same age. He had never thought that these two fellows who were in the same boat would try to hug each other for warmth. This was because Chen Ping'an always felt that Ma Ku-shen was not a fool. Instead, he was very similar to Song Jisin in his bones. He might even be better than him. They did not seem to speak, but they seemed to be waiting. It was as if they were silently telling others that the heavens owed them a lot of things. Sooner or later, they would take them all back. If the heavens owed them a copper coin, Song Jisin would probably ask the heavens to obediently return one tael of silver. Ma Ku-shen might even ask for one tael of gold. Chen Ping'an did not think that this was bad. It was just that he did not like it. The youth was no longer the fool from before. He spoke clearly and asked with a smile, "You are Chen Ping'an from Clay Bottle Lane, right? You live next door to GQ?" Chen Ping'an nodded. "What's the matter?" The youth smiled and pointed at Chen Ping'an's wicker basket, reminding him, "Perhaps you haven't noticed, but the water level of the stream has dropped by a lot. The only good stones left are the deep pool under the covered bridge and the puddle on the back of the green ox. The other places won't work, just like the ones in your basket. They won't be able to retain their qi, and the quality of the stones will quickly change. Some of the lucky ones can be used to make excellent whetstones, while some can be used to make scholars' inkstones. In the end, these things are still good stuff, and it won't be difficult to sell them for a high price." Chen Ping'an smiled and nodded. He did not say anything else. The short youth suddenly said, "Were you practicing martial arts in the stream just now?" Chen Ping'an still did not speak. Ma Ku-shen's eyes sparkled. He laughed, "So you are not stupid. That's right, you are similar to me. We are the same kind of people." Chen Ping'an walked around the youth and said, "I will leave first." Then he picked up his basket and went ashore. The youth squatted in the distance and spat out the chewed dog's tail grass. He shook his head and whispered, "My martial arts are not good, and there are many flaws. No matter how much I practice, I will not be able to get anything out of it." Ma Ku-shen did not turn his head. "Have you retrieved our military token?" The man behind him laughed, "Remember to call me master in the future." The youth did not respond. He stood up and turned his head to ask, "Can you show me that small sword tomb?" It was the military grandmaster with the tiger tally on his back. He claimed to be from Marshall Mountain and had once declared that he would fight against the young martial uncle of the Golden Boy and Jade Girl. The man shook his head. "It is not time yet." Then he became a bit angry. "Why did you deliberately destroy that girl's mental state? Do you know that once you do something like this, you will become a lifelong enemy?" The youth said indifferently, "The path of cultivation is difficult. If I can't even withstand such tribulations, how can I hope to live a long and worry-free life?" The man laughed angrily. "You haven't even entered the sect, yet you dare to speak so arrogantly. Aren't you afraid of biting your tongue?" The youth grinned, revealing his white teeth. "In the future, when I encounter such opportunities on the path of cultivation, I will take the initiative to tell that girl. When the time comes, Master, you are not allowed to interfere. Let her ruin my plans." The man sighed. "Do you know that in this world, there are big and small opportunities, thick and thin fortune, and high and low innate abilities? If you judge everyone based on your own reasoning, you will meet someone with a bigger fist, a deeper cultivation, and a higher realm. When that time comes, they will be in a bad mood and break your immortal bridge with one punch. How will you live then?" The youth smiled. Then I will accept my fate. The man laughed at himself. In the future, I will not reason with you anymore. It is like playing the lute to a cow. The youth suddenly asked, how did that guy from Clay Bottle Alley know the wonders of the stones in the water? He even started to practice martial arts. The man's expression suddenly became stern. Ma Ku Xian, I don't care how arrogant you are, but there is one thing you must remember. We are the orthodox sword cultivators of the military school. Cultivate a sword that can break all techniques, cultivate a sword that follows your heart, cultivate a sword that seeks invincibility, but you are absolutely not allowed to willfully slaughter the innocent, you are not allowed to humiliate the common people, and you are not allowed to intentionally trip up your fellow Taoists because you are jealous of others. The youth stretched. Master, you think too much. No matter how powerful that guy from Clay Bottle Alley is, as long as he doesn't provoke me, it has nothing to do with me. In the end, no matter how high these people's achievements are, they are nothing more than stepping stones for me in the future. Jealous? I can't thank them enough. The man said helplessly, this really doesn't make sense. I think Marshall Mountain will not be peaceful in the future. The youth asked curiously, what's your rank on Marshall Mountain? The man smiled. Let's not talk about this. It hurts my face. The youth rolled his eyes. If I knew, I would have acknowledged you as my master later. The man laughed it off. There was something he did not tell his disciple. There were many kinds of geniuses in the world, and so were their talents. The youth in straw sandals from before seemed to be walking with ordinary 6 steps, but his entire body was filled with fist intent. 43, still 06 chapters. Chen Pinggan did not return to Liu Xianyang's house directly. Instead, he went back to Clay Bottle Alley and told Ning Yarrow about Liu Xianyang's plan. After Ning Yarrow heard it, she did not express any opinions. She only said that this was a matter between the two of them. She was only responsible for taking the money from Liu Xianyang. If Liu Xianyang could avoid the disaster without her help, she would return the 3 bags of gold and copper coins. Chen Pinggan said that this was not a matter of money. In the end, Ning Yarrow coldly replied, then you want to talk about feelings with me? Have we reached that point? Chen Pinggan almost choked to death by her words. He could only squat by the door and scratch his head. Ning Yarrow glanced at the pastries that Chen Pinggan brought over on the table. There were cheap and delicious glutinous rice cakes, as well as relatively expensive rain-dew balls. This must be the way the young man treated his guests. For the first time, the girl's heart softened and she felt guilty. For a moment, she felt that she was a bit unkind. She ate and lived in other people's houses. Even if she could not help much, she should not add fuel to the fire. So she asked, could it be that Liu Xianyang was threatened by the blacksmith shop and had no choice but to sell the dark green armor? For example, the lackeys of the 4 surnames and 10 clans were hiding in the shop and secretly taught Liu Xianyang a lesson? Chen Pinggan thought for a moment and shook his head. No, Liu Xianyang is definitely not the kind of person who would bow his head and admit defeat after being threatened. When I first met him, even when he was beaten to the point of vomiting blood by those people on Fulu Street, he did not say a single word of surrender. He kept holding on and was almost beaten to death. After so many years, Liu Xianyang's character has not changed. Ning Yarrow asked again, young and vigorous, courageous and brave. He values his words and disregards life and death. In fact, there is no lack of wanderers in the alley. I have seen many of them on my way here. It's just that once the benefits are right in front of him and he's faced with a different kind of temptation, will Liu Xianyang be able to keep his heart? Chen Pinggan sank into deep thought again. Finally, he said with a determined gaze, Liu Xianyang would not become a prodigal just because an outsider gave him something. He had deep feelings for his grandfather, unless it was really like what he said. Before his grandfather passed away, he told him repeatedly that he could sell the treasured armor, but not sell it at a cheap price. And that sword manual must be left in their Liu clan, and it will be passed down to future generations. Ning Yarrow said, as far as I know, the masked armor is of good quality, but it's not too rare. As for the sword manual, since Zhengyang Mountain has been coveting it for a long time and even sent 2 people here to search for treasure, it's obvious that they see it as theirs. So, it must be something good. Therefore, the decision to sell the armor and leave behind the sword manual makes sense. Chen Pinggan nodded. Ning Yaro stroked the green scabbard with a cold gaze. To be safe, I'll accompany you to Liu Xianyang's house and send that woman away first. Since Liu Xianyang himself said that he wants to sell it, then just move the chest containing the armor. After that, I'll go with you to the Ruan clan's shop to meet Liu Xianyang and ask him what he thinks. If it's really his grandfather's will before his death, then you and I don't need to tell him what to do. Every family has its own difficulties, so don't meddle in things that you shouldn't meddle in. If it's not, then let him talk about his difficulties. At worst, I'll take the chest back. Chen Pinggan asked worriedly, Miss Ning, are you alright? Ning Yaro sneered, if it's to deal with the moving mountain ape of Zhengyang Mountain, I'll definitely be defeated. But if it's that woman, in this small town, one hand is enough. Chen Pinggan asked curiously, moving mountain ape? Ning Yaro said perfunctorily, it's a vile species of an ancient ferocious beast left behind in this world. Its true form is a giant ape as large as a mountain. Rumor has it that once it reveals its true form, it can uproot a mountain from the ground and carry it away. However, these are all rumors. After all, no one has actually seen it. Zhengyang Mountain has been holding back for hundreds of years. In fact, they have a strong foundation. Although their sect's ranking in the Eastern Aquarius continent isn't high, they can't be underestimated. Therefore, it's best if we don't fight with them. If we fight? Chen Pinggan asked cautiously, what if we fight? Ning Yaro stood up and unsheathed the scabbard by an inch with her thumb. She looked at the youth with straw sandals as if he was an idiot. The girl said matter-of-factly, what else can we do? Chop them to death. Chen Pinggan swallowed his saliva. After that, the youth carried the basket and led the girl, who had put on the veil hat again and a green scabbard, to Liu Xianyang's ancestral house. Ning Yaro turned her head and glanced at the youth's basket. She asked, why are there so few today? Chen Pinggan sighed. Ma Kuxuan, oh, Granny Ma's grandson from Apricot Blossom Lane. He's about the same age as me. Now, he seems to be a completely different person. According to him, the town's geomancy has changed. Therefore, the rocks in the stream are becoming less and less chi. Ning Yaro's expression was solemn. She said in a deep voice, he's right. This town is about to change. You'd better settle this matter as soon as possible and leave the town. Even if you come back after leaving, it's better than staying in the town. Chen Pinggan was not stubborn. He was used to living alone since he was young. Instead, he understood the fickleness of human nature and priorities. He nodded and smiled. I will. As long as I see Liu Xianyang and Master Ruan drink the tea, I'll leave immediately. It's best if Master Ruan agrees to forge a sword for you at that time. Ning Yaro was puzzled as she looked at the joyful fellow. Why are you so happy about something that has nothing to do with you? Why aren't you convinced that you're a good person? Chen Pinggan probably thought that the two of them were familiar with each other. He didn't beat around the bush like before. He said confidently, Liu Xianyang, Ji Kan, and you, Miss Ning. Think about it. There are so many people in the world, and I only care about the good and bad of the three of them. How am I a good person? Ning Yaro smiled and asked, then, what's my ranking among the three of them? Chen Pinggan blushed and said sincerely, for now, I'm third. Ning Yaro took off her saber and held it casually in her hand. She patted the youth's shoulder with the scabbard and said with a fake smile, Chen Pinggan, you should thank me for not killing you. Chen Pinggan was baffled. Don't you find it annoying to brew medicine? Ning Yaro was stunned for a moment before she understood his thoughts. Chen Pinggan, I suddenly realized that even if you go outside, you can still live well. Chen Pinggan wasn't greedy at all. He said sincerely, as long as it's as good as it is now. Ning Yaro didn't comment. She gently shook the green saber in her hand, like a country girl shaking a flower branch. When they reached the corner of Liu Xianyang's alley, a black shadow suddenly jumped out. Ning Yaro almost pulled out her saber, but fortunately, she stopped herself in time. It was a yellow dog that intimately circled around Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan bent down and rubbed the dog's head. He stood up and said with a smile, "It's the pet of the family next door to Liu Xianyang. It's called Lai Fu. It's been many years and it's very timid. In the past, Liu Xianyang and I often brought it up the mountain, but it would only follow behind us to join in the fun. Liu Xianyang always complained that it couldn't catch wild hares and pheasants. In general, Lai Fu can't even compare to a cat. Just like Ma Kuxuan's cat, someone saw it often bring pheasants and snakes into the house. However, Lai Fu is old. It's about 10 years old. It's very old." Speaking of this, the straw sandals youth couldn't help but bend down again and rub Lai Fu's head. He said softly, "You're already so old, so you have to admit that you're old, right? Don't worry, when I earn a lot of money in the future, I won't starve you." Ning Yaro shook her head. She couldn't empathize with this. Even though she had seen a lot of people and a lot of things along the way, she had seen a lot of people and a lot of things. The high and mighty immortals, the common people in the marketplace, the rich and powerful children, the immortals who rode in the wind, she had seen a lot of joys and sorrows. Ning Yaro there was the Buddhist monk who walked barefoot on a windy and stormy night, chanting the name of Buddha and walking with firm steps. There was the poor scholar who went to the capital to take the imperial exam. In a dilapidated ancient temple, he gently drew the eyebrows of a fox in human skin. When he finally set off on his journey again, he didn't regret it even though he knew that his hair was already white. There was the young Taoist priest who had the title of Taoist master. He walked alone in ancient battlefields and mass graves, silently chanting the immeasurable heavenly Lord for blessings. He didn't hesitate to consume his own cultivation to lead a path of transcendence for the lonely souls. There was the middle-aged civil official who personally banned the Dragon King Temple when he first took office. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He set up an incense table by the dry riverbed and read the Dragon King prayer for rain with a hoarse voice. In the end, he knelt in front of the Dragon King Temple and asked for forgiveness for the sake of the people in his territory. There was an old man in his 70s who was unwilling to bring along his son, who had become an official in the new dynasty. He only brought along his grandson, who had just begun his studies, to climb the mountains and write essays. Facing the crumbling mountains and rivers of his country, his tears flowed down his face. He told his beloved grandson about the original names of the provinces and counties that had already been renamed. There was a small boat in a 1,000-mile-long gorge that went straight down the river. There were scholars on both sides of the river. They were high-spirited and vigorous. When they read something that they understood quickly, they looked up to the sky and roared. There was a beautiful woman in armor. After the smoke of war, she rode a horse and drank wine. She was the most beautiful woman. Along the way, Ning Yaro's heart towards the Tao was as steady as a rock, without the slightest hesitation. Now, Ning Yaro saw another scene. There was a lonely young man in a shabby alley. He carried a wicker basket and tied a fish basket. He stroked the head of an old dog. The young man was full of hope for the future. Not long after they returned to Liu Xianyang's house, someone knocked on the door. Chen Pinggan and Ning Yaro looked at each other. Then, Chen Pinggan went to open the door. Ning Yaro just stood at the door. However, she turned back and glanced at the long sword lying quietly on the counter. The person who knocked on the door was Lu Zhengchun. Naturally, the woman was the leader. There were also 2 loyal servants of the Lu family. Lu Zhengchun looked kind and asked softly, "You are Liu Xianyang's friend. Your name is Chen Pinggan, right? We are here to move the box. Liu Xianyang should have told you about it. So, don't worry and accept this bag of money. In addition, our madam has agreed to Liu Xianyang's conditions. In the future, everything will be handed over to him." Chen Pinggan took the bag of money and stepped aside. The graceful and generous woman took the lead and walked into the courtyard. Lu Zhengchun and the 2 servants followed behind. The woman personally opened the red lacquered wooden box that had been placed in the main hall. She squatted down and reached out to touch the ugly armor. Her eyes were blurred for a moment. Then, there was an unconcealable passion and desire. However, this emotion was quickly restrained by the woman. She returned to normal. After she stood up, she indicated that Lu Zhengchun could start moving the box. The box wasn't heavy. After all, There was only a set of armor inside. The woman was the last to leave the house. When she reached the threshold, she turned back and looked at the straw sandals youth. She smiled and said, "Liu Xianyang really treats you as a friend." Chen Pinggan, who didn't understand the meaning behind her words, could only silently send them off. In the end, Chen Pinggan stood outside the door for a long time, unwilling to move. Ning Yarrow came to his side. The woman walked behind Lu Zhengchun and the other two. When she reached the end of the alley, she turned her head and saw the young man and woman standing side by side. She smiled playfully and said, "It's good to be young, but you have to be alive first." In the covered bridge that spanned across the stream, a tall youth lay in a pool of blood. His body twitched and he constantly spat out blood. However, this time, the tall youth could no longer hear a certain dark and skinny fellow screaming someone's dead over and over again. At the northern end of the covered bridge, there was a crowd of people moving about and discussing. They watched the commotion from afar, but they didn't dare approach the youth for fear of attracting trouble. Two people quickly walked onto the covered bridge. The man squatted down and took the youth's wrist to check his pulse. His expression became increasingly heavy. The green-clothed girl was filled with hatred. She gnashed her teeth and said, "He smashed his chest with a single punch. What a vicious method." The man didn't say anything. The green-clothed girl with a ponytail said angrily, "Father, are you just going to watch Liu Xianyang get beaten to death like this? Liu Xianyang is half your disciple." The man never let go of the youth's wrist. He was expressionless as he said indifferently, "How would I know that the great Xingyang mountain would be so unruly this time?" The girl stood up abruptly. "If you don't care, I will." The man raised his head and asked slowly, "Wan Xiu, do you want me to collect your corpse?" The girl strode forward with an indomitable will. She said in a deep voice, "I, Wan Xiu, am not only good at eating, I can also kill." The man's brows were furrowed with thunderous fury. A small part of it was because of his daughter's foolishness, but more of it was because of the old ape of Xingyang Mountain. The man thought about it. Since he had yet to officially take over Qi Jingquan's position, did that mean that he didn't have to be so reasonable? The green-clothed girl suddenly stopped in her tracks. She suddenly saw a skinny youth running madly towards her from the other end of the covered bridge. She saw a familiar figure wearing a pair of straw sandals. He was expressionless and unperturbed. The two of them brushed past each other in an instant. The girl wanted to say something, but she couldn't. For no reason, she felt very wronged and tears flowed down her cheeks. When the youth with straw sandals sat beside him and reached out to grab one of the tall youth's hands, Liu Xianyang, whose vision had already blurred, seemed to regain some vigor. He tried to squeeze out a smile and said intermittently, "That woman said that if I didn't hand over the treasured armor, she would kill you. She also said that since she and her son came to our town, it's only one of them being expelled. She could afford to pay the price. I was afraid, very afraid that she would really kill you. What I told you before wasn't all lies. My grandfather did tell me those words, so I thought that it wasn't a big deal to sell it. It's just that she sent someone to find me just now, saying that the old man was crazy. Once he heard that I didn't have the sword manual, he insisted on killing you first before killing me. I was really worried about you and wanted to tell you. So I ran all the way here and was punched by that old bastard. It did hurt a little." The youth with straw sandals lowered his head and gently wiped away the blood at the corner of Liu Xianyang's mouth. The youth frowned his dark and thin face and said softly, "Don't be afraid, it's fine. Believe me, don't talk anymore. I'll take you home." The tall youth's vigor that he had forcefully held up gradually faded. His vision drifted and he muttered, "I don't regret it. Don't blame yourself. Really. It's just that. I'm just a little scared. It turns out that I'm also afraid of death." In the end, the tall youth tightly gripped his only friend's hand and sobbed, "Chen Pinggan, I'm really afraid of death." The youth with straw sandals sat on the ground. One of his hands tightly gripped Liu Xianyang's hand and the other hand was placed on his knee. He panted heavily, desperately trying to breathe. The young youth was like an old dog at this moment. The eyes of the youth with straw sandals were red. When he wanted to seek justice from the heavens, he was even more like a dog. Chen Pinggan didn't want to be like this. He didn't want to be like this again in his life. 44. The Liu clan's house in Fortune Street was small and exquisite, but it was a world of its own. Even the Shu clan's mistress in the Clear Breeze city felt that it was like setting up a training ground in a snail's shell. She had done it to the extreme and could not ask for anything more. In a pavilion by the lake, the mistress who had just successfully acquired the Liu clan's Baozi armor was smiling triumphantly as she leaned lazily against the railing. It was probably because she was in such a good mood that the fly Lu Zhengchun standing upon the steps of the pavilion did not find him to be that much of an eyesore. Her son, dressed in a bright red robe, stood upon a long bench, throwing bait into the small lake. Close to 100 red back carps crowded together, the red waves rolling, a rather spectacular sight. The mistress then instructed Lu Zhengchun, "You don't have to stay here and await orders. Once this matter is settled, you will come with us to the Clear Breeze city. Besides having my husband take you in as his direct disciple, he will also agree to your grandfather's rather unreasonable request to ensure that you will be able to ascend into the middle 5 realms one day. You must know that this kind of promise is the most valuable, which is why I say your grandfather is an old fox." Upon saying that, the mistress smiled sweetly to herself. "The way I see it, if your grandfather was the head of the Liu clan's dynasty might not have collapsed so quickly. Even the highly arrogant vassal of Dali, Song Jianqiang, admitted that being able to bring about the downfall of the country in just a year, half of the credit goes to your Liu clan's royal family. Of course, your little town's Liu clan has not been that lucky. Together with the main Liu clan, one's glory may not be shared, but one's downfall would really be a downfall. Hence, the Clear Breeze city is giving you this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Do not miss it and make good use of it." Lu Zhengchun bowed low, his hands clasped above his head as he said gratefully, "Lu Zhengchun will never dare to forget Mistress Shu's great kindness. When we reach the renowned Clear Breeze city in the future, I will be Mistress Shu's slave, and Lu Zhengchun swears that I will only be loyal to Mistress Shu in this life." The mistress of the Clear Breeze city smiled charmingly and her eyes narrowed as she said in a gentle voice, "Words that come from the bottom of your heart, please don't let my husband, who will be your future master, hear it. Or perhaps you can repeat it before him when the time comes." Perhaps it was because he had knelt before Liu Xianyang in Clay Bottle Alley, Lu Zhengchun no longer held any grudges against this matter. After hearing the woman's harsh words, he immediately knelt down and prostrated himself on the top of the stairs outside the waterside pavilion. He said in a trembling voice, "I, Lu Zhengchun, will never forget my route." The woman laughed and waved her hand nonchalantly, beginning to chase them away. "All right, get up. When you come to the Clear Breeze city in the future, cultivation is the most time-consuming thing. A long journey tests a horse's strength, and whether you have forgotten your roots, the truth will naturally come to light." Lu Zhengchun backed away from the waterside pavilion and walked down the stairs before he slowly turned around. This heavenly profligate who had once called the wind and rain in the small town, before this woman, seemed to have never straightened his back. The Liu family outside the small town, as the ruling family of a great dynasty, after being dealt a heavy blow by the Dali border army, could be said to have suffered a great blow to their vitality and were unable to recover. It would be very difficult for them to make a comeback in the short term. From top to bottom, the Liu family's direct descendants, collateral branches, and distant relatives could only tuck their tails between their legs and behave themselves. Otherwise, with the wealth and prestige of the Clear Breeze city, they would never dare to take over the Liu family's residence in the small town like a dove taking over a magpie's nest. They even dared to look down from above and order the Liu family's disciples around. Otherwise, even if it were the master and servant pair from Mount Shenyang, it would actually be very difficult. Now that the Liu family was like a dragon in shallow water and the situation was difficult, they really had no choice but to lower their heads. The red-robed boy sneered and said, "He really is a lackey born to be a servant. Mother, why did you take in such a piece of trash? You can't really want my father to take him in as a disciple, right? And you even promised him a middle 5 realms. When did the middle 5 realms become so cheap and worthless?" The woman smiled and said, "Although Lu Zhengchun's appearance is repulsive, but it is not without any redeeming qualities. This person's aptitude is average and it is already a great fortune for him to become an outer sanctum disciple. But at the end of the day, This young man is just a small addition to that big deal and will not be able to stir up any waves. On the surface, Mother has promised so much to the Liu family in the small town. She has promised the Liu family's relatives and the noble family members who have fled from the royal family that they can seek refuge and take root in the Clear Breeze city. The Clear Breeze city will treat them with courtesy and treat them as distinguished guests. She has even specially set aside a large area in the city as the Liu family's private territory for a period of 100 years. After the child finished throwing the bait, he suddenly ran out of the pavilion and came back with a large handful of stones. He then leaned over the railing and threw the stones at the carps, having a great time playing. He then turned his head and said, "Mother, for us to come to the small town to search for the swansea armor, is it just an excuse to deceive people? Is it a smokescreen for the Shu family in the Clear Breeze city to take control of the Liu family? After all, a centipede dies but does not fall down. The Liu family's mighty group of homeless dogs, I heard that just the members of the royal family alone number more than 3,000 people. Adding in the eunuchs, servants, and vassals and the remnants of the fallen country who are unwilling to submit to the Song clan, it will be of great help to the growth of our Clear Breeze city's popularity. If that was the case, then this was the real hub of the fallen Liu family's information circulation." The woman said with a gratified smile, "To be able to think of this, it shows that my son is very smart. But it is still wrong." The boy frowned, waiting for the answer. The woman blinked her eyes. "That swansea armor has a profound secret within it. Simply put, it is not inferior to that sword manual." The boy threw out a rock viciously and it smashed onto the back of a carp. Blood splattered everywhere and the pitiful carp thrashed wildly against the water's surface. The child's eyes burned with passion. "My father is best at attacking and his killing prowess is great, not inferior to that Dali Song Jankyang in any way. But unfortunately, he has always been limited by his naturally weak body and is most fearful of his opponent's shameless methods of exchanging injury for injury. That is why he has not been able to make a name for himself and has even been reduced to a laughingstock. Even our own people in the Clear Breeze city dare to make fun of us behind our backs. Mother, after my father obtains this set of treasured armor, will he be able to attack and defend himself, and be able to compete with that Song Jankyang?" The woman still shook her head. The red-robed boy slapped the railing heavily and said angrily, "Don't keep me in suspense." He bared his fangs, looking like he was about to swallow someone whole, just like a tiger or leopard cub. The woman had never felt that there was anything wrong with her son yelling in front of her. After all, when her son was born, he had received an extremely high prophecy from an expert. The appearance of a tiger and wolf, the aptitude of a ruler. The woman explained patiently, "After your father obtains the treasured armor, once he has successfully comprehended it, he will be able to take another step forward. No matter what kind of defense he wants, he will be able to overcome 10 with brute strength and crush his enemies in one go." The boy laughed loudly and was extremely pleased. "Kill, kill, kill. When the time comes, I will let my father start a massacre from within our Clear Breeze city. The most disgusting things done by our own people are the most disgusting." After the boy laughed, he quickly calmed down. He suddenly thought of something and asked, "Mother, you are really fooling around with Zhengyang Mountain. Aren't you afraid that if that stupid ape comes back to his senses and leaves the town, he will attack us? There is one more thing that I still don't understand. Since that Liu guy already has a porcelain buyer, he has an excellent foundation. Coupled with the treasured armor and sword manual, there are very few people who are so popular. Even I have to admit that I need to look at him in a new light. Then, why is the porcelain buyer unwilling to show up, Mother, so you can fish in troubled waters and let the elder ape of Zhengyang Mountain help us solve the mess? After he killed Liu Xianyang with a punch, everything will be peaceful and Zhengyang Mountain will take care of all the troubles. As for our Clear Breeze city, we will have a lot of room to maneuver." The woman said confidently, "The 1,000-year-old elder ape of Zhengyang Mountain is not very smart, but he is not so stupid that he will be fooled by Mother. In fact, he has already guessed Mother's method of killing with a borrowed knife. As for why the elder ape was willing to pinch his nose and jump into the trap himself, the reason is more complicated. It is because Zhengyang Mountain is not afraid of getting into trouble and there is also a secret history that is unknown to others. You don't have to worry about this for now. The woman fell into deep thought. She organized her thoughts again, trying to find loopholes and fill in the gaps to avoid endless troubles. The young Liu Xianyang's porcelain buyer was once a force that supported the Liu family dynasty. After the dynasty was destroyed, they suffered a huge loss and lost everything. Before that, they were indeed a first-class aristocratic family in the secular kingdom at the foot of the mountain. Otherwise, they would not have been able to spend so much money to keep Liu Xianyang in the small town and buy him for 9 years after confirming his sword embryo aptitude. After Zhengyang Mountain found out about this through some unknown channel, they went to find that poor family and tried to buy Liu Xianyang's natal porcelain. An ancestor of Zhengyang Mountain offered a sky-high price in person. However, that family seemed to have taken the wrong medicine and was unwilling to give in. They only said that they had already sold it to someone else. As for who it was and where it came from, they were even more tight-lipped. After that, the puzzled Zhengyang Mountain heard that it was Zhengyang Mountain's mortal enemy and that the Wind Thunder Garden seized the opportunity to loot a burning house, gaining the upper hand. That family naturally did not dare to say that they had already sold the porcelain to Zhengyang Mountain's mortal enemy, the Wind Thunder Garden, in front of the sword immortal of Zhengyang Mountain. As for the Liu family's ancestral mace armor and sword manual, as well as the news of the Wind Thunder Garden taking over Liu Xianyang's natal porcelain, who leaked it to Zhengyang Mountain? It was so far away, yet so close. It was the Shu family of Qingfeng City, but of course, they were the kind that hid behind the scenes. She was the main schemer. This time, she personally went to the small town and paid a huge price. Naturally, she had to ensure that this deal would at least break even. Otherwise, her family's status in Qingfeng City would plummet and be in danger, not to mention having the extravagant hope of ruling Qingfeng City alone. In fact, there were crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the small town, and they could not be underestimated. Not to mention the declining Liu family, which of the other 3 families did not dominate a part of the territory of the eastern Aquarius continent. In fact, the real foundation of the 4 families and 10 clans did not lie in the number of local tyrants with powerful spells. These family heads and ancestors were actually destined to be inseparable. As the old saying went, if a tree moved, it would die. Unfortunately, they were already the same as the peach trees in the Peachleaf Alley and the old pagoda tree in the center of the small town. If they moved, they would die, and there would be no afterlife. Therefore, even though they had great powers, they could not use them. The foundation of these families lay in the number of dragon kilns they could control and the number of families under their jurisdiction, because this would directly determine how many natal porcelains they could provide to the outside world every year. Once a good seed for cultivation appeared, the buyer who bet on the treasure would most likely give an extra big red packet as long as he was not too short on money. In addition, it was equivalent to forming a relationship with both parties. Of course, it was more important than a nodding acquaintance. The woman suddenly said to her son with emotion, "Don't underestimate anyone, even a lowly dog like Lu Zhengchun. Do you think that just because you came to the small town, you can easily get those fated chances and treasures? It's not like that." Fu Nanhua from Old Dragon City almost had his Taoist heart shattered. Cai Qinqian from Yunxia Mountain even disappeared from the face of the earth. No one knows whether he's alive or not. There was also a junior with good potential who seemed to have a stroke of luck on the other side of the covered bridge. He made a water observer and ruined his state of mind. It's no different from someone smashing a big hole in the bottom of the Heart Lake, causing the lake water to drop. This kind of thing will not stop here. On the contrary, it will only increase. Therefore, on the path of cultivation, there is no one who is free and unfettered. The child thought for a moment. It's better to be safe than sorry. Mother, I will be careful. The woman nodded. That's for the best. The child threw the last stone and asked, "What's going on with that Qi Jingchun?" The woman was rarely angry. She sternly reprimanded, "How dare you respectfully address Mr. Qi?" The child was stunned, but he obediently corrected himself. "Is Mr. Qi in trouble?" The woman hesitated for a moment and slowly said, "Mr. Qi's teacher was not only a sacrificial offering in the Confucian temple, but he was also the second person to the left of the Confucian school's hierarch." The child was stunned. This meant that Qi Jingquan's teacher was the Confucian school, or more accurately, the fourth person in the long history of the Confucian school. If someone boasted that such an unimaginable existence could completely crush the largest mountain in the eastern bottle continent in a fit of rage, the child wouldn't dare to say that he believed it completely, but he would certainly be skeptical. The woman was worried. She whispered, "It's just that the Saint of Saints is now inferior to those dilapidated statues in this small town." The child swallowed and asked casually, "What should we do with Liu Xianyang's friend?" The woman thought for a moment. "You mean the orphan surnamed Chen from Clay Bottle Alley?" The child nodded. The woman smiled. "Didn't you also call him an ant when you met him? Let them fend for themselves." 45. Two travel-worn guests had arrived at the manufacturing supervisor's office. Both were in their 20s, tall and handsome, as tall as a pine tree. When the gatekeeper heard that they had come to visit Sir Kui, he didn't even inquire about their identities. He hurriedly led them into the official residence and led them to the courtyard where Sir Kui was temporarily residing. After knocking on the door, the gatekeeper respectfully took his leave. The person who opened the door was the gentleman who had come on behalf of the Confucian school to ask for the winnings. When he was young, he had won the reputation of being called Huibelang and had always been viewed as the best candidate to be the next mountain master of Lakeview Academy. When he saw the two youths, he was pleasantly surprised. Looking at one of the youths leaning against the door, he asked with a smile, "Barqiao, who is this friend beside you?" The youth called Barqiao smiled mischievously and said, "This fellow is a descendant of the Chen family of the Great Yong Dynasty's Dragontail Commandery. Brother Kui, you can call him Songfeng. This fellow doesn't like beautiful women or fine wine. His only hobby is stone inkstone. He heard that there were a few old pits in the creek here and wanted to try his luck. He also has a distant relative who is accompanying us. If it weren't for her, Songfeng and I wouldn't have been delayed until now. We would have arrived 2 days earlier. She doesn't like interacting with people, so she went to wander around the town. Ari, what a pity, what a pity. On the way here, I heard that a prince of the Sui dynasty had obtained a heavenly opportunity and earned a golden dragon carp. In the future, he has great hopes of becoming a dragon. My eyes are red with envy. Brother Kui, take a look. They are bloodshot, aren't they?" The youth extended his head towards the Confucian gentleman. The latter smiled and used his finger to push the head away, reminding Liu Barqiao, "Since you've already delayed the trip, you should hurry and take care of business. What are you wasting time here for? When did the Wind Thunder Garden's style of conduct become so procrastinating?" The descendant of the Chen family of the Dragontail Commandery had an apologetic expression. Smiling wryly, he said, "On the way here, there was an accident. Brother Barqiao injured the vital organs of the sword-nurturing chamber. I had no choice but to take the risk and move the natal sword to the Mingtang aperture. If it weren't for my insufficient cultivation and becoming a burden, Brother Barqiao definitely wouldn't have been injured." Liu Barqiao laughed heartily. "They're just a few sneaky wild cultivators who relied on some crooked methods to luckily injure me. Anyway, they're already dead souls under my sword. They're not worth mentioning. If I wasn't in a hurry, this young master would make a few cenotaphs for them, erect a tombstone, and write down that they died under Liu Barqiao's sword. In the future, when I become the #1 swordsman, it might even become a scenic spot, right?" The scholarly gentleman had known this genius sword cultivator of the Wind and Thunder Garden for a long time and knew that he was born with an unruly personality. He brought the two of them into the courtyard. Liu Barqiao suddenly lowered his voice. "Brother Kui, tell me something. Is this world about to collapse? Does Mr. Qi from Cliff Academy, who migrated here, really want to go against the heavens?" The scholar surnamed Kui turned a deaf ear. Liu Barqiao chuckled and pointed at Mr. Kui. "I already understand." The scholarly gentleman seemed to be careless as he said, "Songfeng, I went to visit Mr. Qi at the school earlier. He talked about self-cultivation and lamented that time waits for no man. Self-cultivation was to govern the country and bring peace to the world. This saint seed from the Kui family only talked about self-cultivation and then stopped." At first, Chen Songfeng thought that it was just polite greetings between scholars. However, when he saw the scholar's eyes, he immediately understood and cupped his fists. "Mr. Kui, I'll go look for that distant cousin of mine. When I come back, I'll ask Mr. Kui for advice on how to govern the country." In Chen Songfeng's words, intentionally or unintentionally, he skipped the family part and only mentioned governing the country. Chen Songfeng hurriedly left. The scholar surnamed Kui sighed and sat at the stone table in the small courtyard with Liu Baqiao. Liu Baqiao crossed his legs and said bluntly, "This Chen Songfeng is smart and can understand easily. However, his table manners are too careless. It's not too late to sit down and talk nonsense with you before leaving. Why is he in such a hurry to ask for the ancestral shade locust tree leaves? I don't think it's necessary. Now, in our eastern vast continent, other than the Dragon-Tail County Chen family, how many families with the surname are left? If those locust tree leaves don't obediently fall into Chen Songfeng's pocket, are they going to fall into the hands of the local people of the small town?" The Dragon-Tail County Chen family of the eastern vast continent was the Dragon-Tail County Chen family. Although they had been silent for a long time, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Although their reputation was not great, they were still a 1,000-year-old family that had produced a large number of heroes. Therefore, even a prosperous sect like Liu Baqiao's Wind and Thunder Garden did not dare to underestimate them. Therefore, even people like Liu Baqiao were willing to associate with them and treat them as half-friends. The scholar asked curiously, "You came here to find Master Wan and ask him to help you forge a sword?" Liu Baqiao hemmed and hawed and did not speak in detail. The general meaning was to do something for the sect. If it was successful, the Wind and Thunder Garden would come forward to plead with Master Wan to forge a sword for him. As for the reason for that matter, Liu Baqiao seemed to find it difficult to say. The scholar said again, "Do you know that someone from Xingyang Mountain has also come, and it's a master and a servant?" Liu Baqiao was stunned and said in shock, "I haven't heard of it at all. Who came from Xingyang Mountain?" Then, this young sword cultivator who was known for being domineering in the Wind and Thunder Garden closed his eyes and put his palms together. He prayed in fragments, "Please don't let it be the devastatingly beautiful Fairy Su. I beg on my knees that it's not Fairy Su who has graced us with her presence. Otherwise, should I draw my sword or not? If Fairy Su looks at me, I'll go limp. How can I bear to draw my flying sword?" The scholar was somewhat helpless. "Don't worry, it's not the Fairy Su you admire. It's the white ape who guards the mountain. He's escorting the precious granddaughter of Dao Kuei, the pure young sword ancestor of Zhengyang Mountain. Old Kui, you're really my lucky star. If it's not Fairy Su, then everything will be fine." Liu Baqiao immediately jumped up and down. He laughed loudly and said, "Why should I be afraid of him? Do you think I'm afraid of an old beast? We can be afraid of anyone in the Wind and Thunder Garden, but not Zhengyang Mountain." The scholar hesitated for a moment. The Wind and Thunder Garden and Zhengyang Mountain are both orthodox sword cultivators of the same origin. Why can't the knot be untied? Liu Baqiao put away his joking expression and said in a deep voice, "Kui Minghuang, when you come to the Wind and Thunder Garden in the future, don't say a word of this to anyone." The scholar sighed deeply. Wind and Thunder Garden, Zhengyang Mountain. Both sides, from the sword immortals to the disciples who had just entered the sect, usually did not need to have any disagreements. As long as they met, they would immediately draw their swords and fight. The gatekeeper of the official residence and the elderly steward suddenly rushed to the courtyard door in a hurry. Kui Minghuang and Liu Baqiao stood up at the same time. The steward walked into the courtyard. After bowing, he said, "Mr. Kui, we've just received news that Zhengyang Mountain has attacked a young man named Liu Xianyang." Liu Baqiao was instantly enraged. Which Liu Xianyang? The steward was rather respectful to Mr. Kui. As for this young master whose name he did not know, the old man was not afraid at all. He replied calmly, "Young master, there's only one person in our town named Liu Xianyang." Liu Baqiao's expression changed drastically. He sneered. "Zhengyang Mountain, you've gone too far." Kui Minghuang's expression was calm. He asked, "Has Mr. Qi stepped in?" The steward shook his head. "Not yet. I heard that the young man was taken to Master Wan's sword shop. Even if he's not dead, His probably on his last breath. Someone saw with their own eyes that the young man's chest was smashed apart by a punch. How could he have survived? Kui Ming Huang smiled. Thank you for telling me this, old mister. The elderly steward hurriedly waved his hand. You flatter me. It's my duty. I've troubled you, Mr. Kui. After the steward left with the gatekeeper, Kui Ming Huang saw Liu Baqiao sit back down on the stone bench. He asked in confusion, Are you here for that young man? Liu Baqiao's expression was gloomy. You can say that. It's going to be very troublesome. Very troublesome. Kui Ming Huang asked, It's not just about the grudge between the Wind and Thunder Garden and Jingyang Mountain? Liu Baqiao nodded. It's far more than that. The scholar sat with his arms folded. He said softly, The tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. It seems that I should go and retrieve the square treasured jade tablet. Even if Mr. Qi misunderstands that Lakeview Academy is kicking him when he's down, there's nothing I can do. Kui Ming Huang stood up. I'm going to the academy. I'll be back soon. After leaving the official residence on Fulu Street, he passed by the 12-legged memorial archway. He stopped and looked up at the plaque with the words Never Pass Away. Under the sunlight, the scholar covered his forehead with his hand. After a moment of hesitation, he turned around and returned to the official residence. On Fulu Street, a white-haired, burly old man held the hand of a little girl with a face as delicate as a porcelain doll. They did not enter the Liu family's mansion. Instead, they went to the Song family's mansion. Someone was already waiting at the door to welcome them. In the main hall with the plaque Sweet Dew Hall, a dignified old man stood up and came to the door to greet them. He cupped his fists and said, Li Hong greets Senior Ape. The mountain-moving elder ape of Zhengyang Mountain nodded casually to the patriarch of the Li family. He let go of the little girl's hand and lowered his head. He said softly, Young mistress, I'll be waiting for you at the top of the mountain. The little girl sat on the threshold of the main hall. She was angry but did not say anything. The patriarch of the Li family said softly, Don't worry, senior. The Li family will definitely send young Mistress Dao out of town safely. The mountain-moving elder ape nodded. I'll have to trouble you to take care of young mistress this time. Let me have a word with young mistress. The old man immediately left the main hall and ordered everyone in the family to stay 100 steps away from Sweet Dew Hall. The old man also sat on the threshold. He thought for a moment and said, Young mistress, there are some things that I shouldn't tell you. But since things have come to this, there's no point in hiding it anymore. I'll tell you everything. The trip to the town this time is most likely a meticulously planned trap. That woman from the Shu family in Clearwind City can't escape. However, she might not be the most important person. The powerful thing about this trap is that even if I'm aware of it, I can't help but jump into it. Young mistress, you might not know this, but the owner of that sword manual was once a traitor of the sword Dao from Jingyang Mountain. He created it himself. According to your grandfather, the most valuable thing about this sword manual is that although the author's sword Dao achievement is only at the threshold of a sword immortal, the content of the sword manual points to the great Dao. Young mistress, think about it. Even the Xie family's patriarch, who's on good terms with our Zhengyang Mountain, still gave this sword manual an extremely high evaluation. Following that, the old man's tone turned colder. And this sword Dao genius who betrayed his master and ancestors sought refuge with our Jingyang Mountain's old enemy, the Wind Thunder Garden, when he was at his wit's end. The Wind Thunder Garden did indeed shelter him for most of his life. He was a coward for most of his life. Later on, in order to verify the sword manual, he secretly left the Wind Thunder Garden and sought out several sword immortals who had proven their Dao. For example, the Xie family's patriarch. Even though they all looked down on his character, they all praised the sword manual endlessly. The ancestor of the Xie family once said in private that the sword scripture is a fusion of the spirit of the sword paths of Zhengyang Mountain and Wind Thunder Garden. Once someone from either side cultivates it, then the battle of formula paths between the two families will come to an end. The old man said grimly, Therefore, if I can obtain this sword manual and give it to you to cultivate, young mistress, that would be the best outcome. Taking a step back, Even if our Xingyang Mountain doesn't obtain it and gives it to the old Dragon City or Cloudglow Mountain, Xingyang Mountain can still tolerate it if those youngsters obtain the fortuitous encounter. However, there's one thing we absolutely can't compromise on, and that's allowing those bastards from the Wind Thunder Garden to obtain the sword manual. The old man's face was livid and ferocious. Young mistress, don't forget that the patriarch of our Zhengyang Mountain is the ancestor of your lineage on the sword testing field in the depths of the Wind Thunder Garden. Back then, when Zhengyang Mountain was at its weakest, she resolutely challenged the master of the Wind Thunder Garden of that generation. In the end, after she died in battle, not only was her corpse not sent back to Zhengyang Mountain for burial by the Wind Thunder Garden, her corpse was even exposed to the sun. There was even a sword of a swordsman from the Wind Thunder Garden stuck in her head, deliberately allowing others to mock her. It's been 300 years, a whole 300 years. Even though Zhengyang Mountain is acknowledged to have produced many geniuses, they can't even pull out a single sword from the Wind Thunder Garden. Generations of sword cultivators from Zhengyang Mountain have endured this great humiliation. As long as Zhengyang Mountain doesn't destroy the Wind Thunder Garden, it'll be the joke of the entire Eastern Aquarius continent. Why is it that every patriarch of our Zhengyang Mountain is unwilling to hold a celebration and announce it to the world after becoming a sword immortal? The little girl had actually already memorized these past events by heart. She had heard them so much that her ears were growing calluses. However, when her family and elders talked about this before, they would try their best to speak of this official grievance in a nonchalant tone. They were far from being as furious and direct as the mountain-moving ape. The little girl asked in a childish voice, "Grandpa White Ape, then why don't you just kill that stubborn youth with a single punch?" Although his meridians are now broken and his aura is in disarray, the sword manual will naturally be pulverized along with it. Even immortals can't restore it. However, it's better to be safe than sorry. What if someone saves him and obtains the sword manual? What should our Xingyang Mountain do then? The sword manual's inheritance method was extremely special and mysterious. It could not be explained with words. It was as if the Liu ancestor had inscribed it on the wall. Or rather, the traitor of Zhengyang Mountain back then had left behind an indeterminate sword intent in the bodies of his descendants. It had been passed down from generation to generation, waiting for the appearance of an extremely talented descendant who could control the sword intent that contained the sword manual's contents. Therefore, as long as the youth died, his porcelain buyer and the Wind Thunder Garden would be completely hopeless. The sword manual that had never truly appeared in the world would vanish just like that. The old man laughed and said, "If I kill that youth on the spot, I'll be instantly chased out of this small world. What will you do then, miss? Do you want to face the people of the Wind Thunder Garden alone? Moreover, all spells are forbidden in this place. Master Wan can forge swords and kill people, but his ability to save people is really mediocre. Other than that, do you think Qi Jingchun will make a move? Absolutely not. He's already a clay bodhisattva crossing the river. He can't even protect himself now. Moreover, if he really pisses me off, I'll just reveal my true form. I'd like to see if this world can support my 10,000-meter tall true form." The old man stood up with a majestic aura and said, "Miss, there's no need to pay attention to the youth on the covered bridge anymore. Allow me to kill the people of the Wind Thunder Garden and wait for you outside the mountain peak. If that Qi Jingchun is sensible, he'll watch from the sidelines. If he dares to interfere, I'll dare smash him into pieces. Even if Master Ron makes a move, I'll fight him to the end. Only then will this trip not be in vain." The little girl thought about it and smiled brilliantly. "Grandpa White Ape, go ahead. Don't worry about me." The old man smiled freely. "Miss, there's even less of a need to worry about me." In a room of the sword shop by the stream, the thick smell of blood permeated the air. Basins of bloody water were carried out, followed by basins of clear water. An old man, the shopkeeper of the Yang clan's medicine shop, who was practically grabbed by a girl in green like a chick, sat on a stool in front of the window. He reached out to wash away the bloodstains on his hands. Sweat seeped out of his forehead as he looked up and shook his head helplessly. "Master Wan, this youth's injuries are really too severe." If it were outside the town, Master Wan, with his arms crossed, said with a straight face, "Cut the crap." The old man could only smile bitterly. He had indeed said a bunch of crap. If it were outside the town, he wouldn't even have to make a move. The girl in green, Wan Xiu, stared fixedly at the locust tree leaf on the sickly youth's forehead. It had already dimmed and was still green, but there wasn't the slightest hint of green. She abruptly turned her head and angrily asked, "Didn't we agree that if Chen Pinggan took out his locust tree leaf, Liu Xianyang would have half a chance of survival?" The old shopkeeper of the Yang clan's medicine shop sighed. If the locust tree leaf's owner suffered such a serious injury and then received the ancestral blessing of the locust tree leaf, of course, there would be a 50% chance of survival. But if it was used to give the blessing to others, it's a different matter. Wan Xiu angrily shouted, "Surnamed Yang, then why did you speak nonsense before, saying there was a 50% chance? Why didn't you say so earlier?" The old man's face was sullen, and he felt extremely wronged. "If I didn't say so, I'm afraid that before the youth died, I would have been beaten to death by you." Wan Xiu was so angry that her face turned white. She was about to open her mouth and curse. The man said in a low voice, "Xiu Xiu, don't be rude to shopkeeper Yang." Wan Xiu clenched her teeth and remained silent. After a moment of silence, the man glanced at the dumbstruck old shopkeeper who hadn't moved for a long time. Like thunder in spring, he began to curse, "Shopkeeper Yang, you're F***king standing here like a block of wood. Are you looking for death?" Encountering such a father and daughter pair, the old man really wanted to cry but had no tears. Most importantly, he didn't dare to show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. He could only brace himself and continue to treat a dead horse as a living horse. From beginning to end, the straw sandals youth didn't make a big fuss, nor did he wail. He only brought the water out again and again, changing the basin of bloody water into basin of clear water. After another 15 minutes, the medicine shop shopkeeper was also extremely irritated. He lowered his head and looked at the basin of clear water. Suddenly, he slapped the water, causing countless splashes. Then, he raised his head and said to Master Wan with incomparable grief and indignation, "Master Wan, you might as well stab me to death. I'm just a medicine seller, not a godly doctor who can bring the dead back to life." The blacksmith man frowned bit by bit. The old man immediately shrunk his neck. The young man finally spoke, "Shopkeeper Yang, let's try again." When the old man turned to look at the youth's eyes were clean. He slightly emphasized his tone, "Try again." The old man let out a breath of turbid air. He couldn't bear it and said, "Child, this old man really can't do anything." The youth squeezed out a smile with difficulty, "Shopkeeper Yang, I beg you." The old man's face was filled with exhaustion, but he still shook his head. The last bit of hope in the straw sandals youth's eyes also disappeared. He squatted down and put down the basin. He sat by the bed and held the tall youth's slightly cold hand. He squeezed out a smile that was uglier than bitterness and said softly, "I'll be back." The youth stood up and left the room. When he reached the threshold, he suddenly turned around and bowed to thank the Wan father and daughter, the old shopkeeper, and the 3 people who had been busy until now. The youth stepped over the threshold. The sunlight was somewhat dazzling. The youth paused for a moment and then strode forward. "If the heavens don't give justice, it's fine. I'll get it myself. I'll get as much as I can." 46. Not long after the youth left the house, the girl in green stomped her feet and was about to follow him. She was stopped by the middle-aged man who had changed from Master Wan to Master Wan. He said sternly, "Xiu Xiu, if you get involved now, you'll only do more harm than good and harm Chen Pinggan. He'll truly be doomed by then." Wan Xiu did not turn around. She only turned her head abruptly. Her shiny black ponytail swung in a beautiful arc in the air. The girl's eyes were sharp as she said in an almost harsh tone, "Father, you didn't get involved in Liu Xianyang's matter either. What happened?" The man wanted to say something but stopped himself. In the end, he did not reveal the secret. He said in a deep voice, "Trust me. The greatest help you can give to that youth now is to tell him as much as you can about the secrets and rules of this small paradise. Ask him to work within the framework. It'll be good if he can take advantage of everything." Ruan Xiu did not fully understand. She was hesitant. The man waved his hand and said patiently, "You are my daughter." That young man from Mud Bottle Alley, no matter how big the stone he threw into the pond was, the splash was limited. It would not disturb the old bastard at the bottom of the pond. This means that everything can be dealt with, but you, Ruan Xiu, are different. Remember, you have to be calm whenever something big happens. I told you to read more, but you didn't listen. You can't even compare to a youth from a shabby alley. To think that you're a cultivator. The man actually regretted it as soon as he said the last sentence. He could not help it. When it came to his daughter, he could not stop himself from saying the last sentence. Fortunately, the girl did not feel wronged this time. She quickly ran out of the house, leaving the man with a complicated mood. The man, whose real name was Ruan Xiu, picked a stool and sat down. He held the tall youth's wrist. His pulse was a mess. It was terrible. The man who was already in a bad mood became gloomier. He complained, "Qi Jing-chun is really something. Zhengyang Mountain is so opportunistic. Even if we can't expel him according to the rules, we should at least teach him a lesson as an example. Even if we can't kill him, what's wrong with beating him a few times? Otherwise, with the constant influx of new people, it'll be even more chaotic." "Won't it be chaotic? What? Are you thinking that since you're going to step down in a few days, you'll leave me a mess? What happened to the responsibility of a scholar?" The shoddy old doctor sat at the side and looked down. He absolutely did not interrupt in order to avoid getting himself into trouble. The old man only dared to constantly criticize in his heart. What happened to being calm in every major event? After Ruan Cheng finished complaining, he finally sighed and said, "You, Qi Jing-chun, have your hands and feet tied. There's nothing you can do about it. You can ignore the first part of what I said, but don't forget to listen to this part." The old shopkeeper of the Yang family's shop had actually been eavesdropping all this while. After hearing what Yi Shiwen said, he was immediately impressed. He thought to himself that Yi Shiwen was indeed worthy of being the next sage to guard the heavenly abode. His face was so thick that it could even block a flying sword. Ruan Ju suddenly looked at the old man and asked, "I've only heard that a married daughter is like spilled water. She hasn't even gotten married yet, and she's already siding with an outsider." The old man had been holding it in for a long time and couldn't help but want to say a few words of conscience. Otherwise, he would be letting down his unyielding character. Thus, he mustered up his courage and said, "Teacher Ruan, is it because I'm old and blind? I keep having the feeling that that young man doesn't seem to like your shoushou that much." Ruan Qiongzhan looked at the old man with a pitiful gaze and said firmly, "There's no need to doubt it. You're old and blind." The old man also looked at the man with a pitiful gaze. The two of them were speechless. On the other side of the well, Ruan Xiu caught up with Chen Pinggan. She also didn't say anything, as if she didn't know what to say. Chen Pinggan smiled at her. He remembered the first time they met on the back of the green ox. He had thought that she was mute, or that she didn't know how to speak the dialect of the small town. Only now did he realize that she just didn't like to speak. She followed the footsteps of the straw-sandal youth and walked towards the covered bridge. The blue-clothed girl finally mustered up her courage and said, "Chen Pinggan, I'm called Ruan Xiu. My father is called Ruan Ju, and he's a swordsmith. I've been smithing and forging swords with my father since I was young. This time, I came to your small town because my father said that the sect had entrusted me with this task, and that the water and soil here were most suitable for forging a sword furnace, so I came here to wade in muddy waters. In truth, I know that my father wants to find an opportunity for me. My father is a person who cares about face no matter what, just like your friend Liu Xianyang. My father actually really wants to take him as a disciple. You might not know, but if my father chooses to establish a sect here in the future, the choice of the first disciple will be very important." Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "I don't blame your father." At this point, the straw-sandal youth paused and raised the back of his hand to rub his chin. He said bitterly, "I know I shouldn't blame others, but I'm actually very angry. I'm very angry that your father didn't take Liu Xianyang as a disciple earlier. I'm angry that no one stopped Liu Xianyang when something happened to him. Even though I know it's wrong, I'm still very angry. Ruan Xiu nodded. That's human nature. Chen Pinggan didn't want to waste any more time here. He asked, Miss Ruan, is there something you need from me? Ruan Xiu asked carefully, you're not going to seek revenge from the people of Zhengyang Mountain, are you? Chen Pinggan didn't say anything. He neither denied nor admitted it. The girl wasn't good with words to begin with. She simply said whatever came to her mind. Don't be so reckless. Zhengyang Mountain is a famous sect in our eastern Aquarius continent. That old ape's identity is actually no different from the ancestor of Zhengyang Mountain. Even if the old ape can't use any spells or divine abilities here, it's very easy for him to deal with you. Besides, after he severely injured Liu Xianyang, Mr. Qi will definitely punish him. So at the very least, you don't have to worry about this matter being treated as if nothing happened. Chen Pinggan interrupted the girl and said, Miss Ruan, by punishment, do you mean that the murderer will be chased out of town? Ruan Xiu was speechless. Chen Pinggan smiled and comforted the girl instead. His eyes were sincere and as clear as a stream of water. Miss Ruan, I appreciate your kindness. Of course, I won't foolishly rush up and fight with that kind of immortal. Ruan Xiu was relieved and patted her chest out of habit. Perhaps she felt that her actions were a little childish and not elegant enough, unlike a lady from a noble family. The ponytailed girl smiled a little embarrassedly. Chen Pinggan also smiled and said, I only gave you 3 fish last time. I was too stingy. Ruan Xiu blushed and asked worriedly, what about your left hand? Chen Pinggan raised his tightly bandaged left hand. It's fine. It's fine now. Ruan Xiu sorted out her thoughts and said slowly, Chen Pinggan, don't be rash. Mr. Qi is in a difficult situation now. Moreover, when Mr. Qi and my father take over, it's very likely that the town will usher in a new upheaval. It's hard to say whether it's good or bad at the moment, so don't be rash. Chen Pinggan nodded and said, okay. Ruan Xiu was inexplicably anxious. At the end of the day, it was because she was very anxious. According to her temperament, she should have killed the old ape of Mount Shenyang by now, but now she had to persuade the young man not to take the risk. This was going against her conscience. But the problem was that, as she said, the general trend was indeed more stable than rash. This was also her intuition. If she, Ruan Xiu, recklessly went to seek an explanation, even if she caused great trouble, her father would definitely not ignore it and would most likely be able to suppress it. But this Chen Pinggan in front of her could only be responsible for his own life. Chen Pinggan and Ruan Xiu said goodbye and left, running alone to the covered bridge. He had just said goodbye to a young girl, and now he saw another young girl. On the stone steps at the south end of the covered bridge sat a young girl with a sword and a saber. Her face was solemn. She was wearing a dark green robe, with long and narrow eyebrows and tightly pursed lips. Beside her were 2 beautifully woven bags embroidered with golden silk. Chen Pinggan quickly ran to the covered bridge. As soon as he reached the bottom of the steps, the young girl, Ning Yao, threw down the 2 bags of copper coins and said indifferently, here you go. Chen Pinggan stood at the bottom of the steps and caught the 2 bags of money with both hands. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Ning Yao said with a straight face, I promised to ensure Liu Xianyang's safety. Now it's my fault. I, Ning Yao, am not worthy of Chen Pinggan and Liu Xianyang. The young girl was well aware that in this small town, no one could save a young man with an ordinary physique if his chest was smashed by an immortal. Furthermore, if Liu Xianyang could be saved, even if there was only a slim chance of survival, with Chen Pinggan's personality, even if he would be beheaded if he stayed at the blacksmith shop, he would definitely not leave without permission. Chen Pinggan walked up the steps and squatted not far from her. He handed the 2 bags of money back to the young girl and said softly, Miss Ning, you can keep the money. You can also take the bag of money from my house in Mud Bottle Alley. I don't need it anymore. In the future, if possible, help me hire someone to take care of my house and Liu Xianyang's house. The young girl did not take the money bags. She was so angry that she laughed. Then, do you want me to help you put up couplets and door gods every spring festival? Chen Pinggan said with a serious face, if possible, that would be the best. The young girl was so angry that smoke almost came out of her 7 orifices. She scolded, "You were slapped in the face by an oxtail when you were young. So what? You can do stupid things with a justifiable reason? I'm so angry. Anyway, Chen Pinggan, you don't have to care about this matter. Do you think you can deal with a mountain-moving ape from Xinjiang Mountain with your mediocre skills? Liu Xianyang's broken house, you can take care of it yourself. Go buy your couplets and door gods. I, Ning Yao, will not serve you." Chen Pinggan looked at the young girl and said, "Miss Ning, although I haven't known you for long, I can be sure of one thing. If you have the confidence to avenge Liu Xianyang, you will never return these 2 bags of money to me, at least not now." Chen Pinggan put the money on the steps between the two of them. "Miss Ning, do you think I'm still in the mood to be polite with you at this time? You, Liu Xianyang, and I are just doing business. It's not like you're trying to trick us. It's just that no one would have thought that we would encounter such a natural disaster. How can we let you pay with your life? Believe me, it's not just me, Chen Pinggan, who doesn't want to see this happen. Liu Xianyang, that fool, doesn't want to see this happen either. If he could speak, he would only talk about men's business and leave women alone." The young man suddenly grinned and said, "Of course, I don't dare to say that to Miss Ning." Ning Yao placed both hands on the white scabbard sword and narrowed her eyes. "I only said half of what I wanted to say. Guilt is half of it. Also, ever since I ran away from home, I, Ning Yao, have traveled the world. I've never met a hurdle that I could avoid." The young girl stretched out her thumb and pointed at her heart. "Here as well." Chen Pinggan thought for a moment. "Miss Ning, before you do anything, can you let me find 3 people first? After that, we'll go our separate ways." Ning Yao asked, "How long will it take?" Chen Pinggan said without hesitation, "Half a day at most." Ning Yao asked again, "Besides Qi Jingchun, who are the other 2? Chen Pinggan shook his head. "Miss Ning, don't ask." Ning Yao frowned. "The Kill Supervision Office doesn't care about this. Do you really think it's a small matter like stealing chickens and fighting on the streets?" Chen Pinggan was about to stand up when Ning Yao said in a deep voice, "Take the money away." Chen Pinggan could only put it away. "Chen Pinggan, wait a moment, turn around first." After asking Chen Pinggan to turn around, Ning Yao suddenly bent down, lifted her robe, and took out a simple dagger tied to her calf. She stood up and handed it to the young man. Her tone was very serious as she said, "This is a unique skirt dagger in my hometown. Every woman has one. Since it's an emergency, I don't care about local customs. But don't forget, I'm lending this dagger to you, not giving it to you." Chen Pinggan was a little confused, but he stretched out a hand to take the dagger. The young girl said angrily, "Use both hands. Can you be a little more polite?" The young man hurriedly raised his other hand, but he was still puzzled. Ning Yao said angrily, "Do you think you can kill that mountain-moving ape with just a few pieces of broken porcelain? Cai Qinqian is just a person who hasn't gone far on the path of cultivation. What's more, that old beast of Xinjiang Mountain was born with a vision and has the most rough and thick skin. Not to mention porcelain, even ordinary immortal weapons can't hurt that old beast at all. What's the point of leaving 1 or 2 scars? It's not useful at all." The young man who took the dagger with both hands and didn't know where to place it had a strange expression on his face. Ning Yao glared at him and said, "You're about to cut someone with the dagger, and you're not allowed to curse." Chen Pinggan was speechless. For some reason, the young man sat back down on the steps and looked up at the sky in the south. The young girl stood beside the young man. Chen Pinggan tried to persuade her for the last time, "You'll really die." The young girl crossed her arms in front of her chest. She had a sword on one side and a dagger on the other. Her expression was indifferent. "I've seen more dead people than you've seen living people." Then, she deliberately said in a casual tone, "You can tie that dagger to your arm and hide it in your sleeve later." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Okay." Chen Pinggan patted his knee hard and stood up. He suddenly said, "I'm very happy to have met you." The young girl suddenly turned around and took the lead to walk on the covered bridge. A heroic young girl, a long sword with a snow-white scabbard, and a narrow dagger with a light green scabbard. Her figure at this moment. It was the most beautiful scene the young man had ever seen in his life. At this moment, the young man felt that even if he could walk out of the town, he would never see a scene more moving than this. This life was worth it. Therefore, the young man who had become a little afraid of death after hearing Priest Lu's words was no longer afraid of death like before. If he died, he would die. 47. Chen Pinggan and Ning Yarrow parted ways at the 12-legged memorial archway. Chen Pinggan went to Clay Bottle Alley and knocked on the door. Song Jisin, are you home? The girl who was scooping up a ladle of water with a gourd in the kitchen burped repeatedly. After drinking the water, she immediately felt refreshed. She put down the ladle and slowly walked out of the kitchen. She ran to open the courtyard door and felt a little strange. She still replied in a methodical manner, "My young master is not home." Chen Pinggan, why are you knocking on the door? Didn't you always stand in your courtyard and chat with us? Chen Pinggan said across the courtyard door, I have something to do. After GQ opened the door, she joked, what a rare guest. She looked at Chen Pinggan's expression and asked, why are you looking for my young master? If you're not in a hurry, I can help you pass a message. If you're in a hurry, you'll have to go to the manufacturing supervision office to find someone. You've seen it with your own eyes before. My young master has a good relationship with the new manufacturing supervision office. She found that Chen Pinggan's feet were rooted to the ground. She rolled her eyes and said, come in, why are you standing there in a daze? Is my house a dragon's pool or a tiger's den? Or do I have to charge you one tael to drink water? Speaking of this, the girl covered her mouth and giggled, for you, the latter must be more terrifying. Chen Pinggan pulled the corner of his mouth and forced a smile. He said softly, actually, I'm here to look for you. I shouted like that before because I was afraid that Song Jisin would misunderstand. GQ smiled knowingly and asked, then tell me, what's the matter? I'll say the ugly words first. Neighbors are neighbors, friendship is friendship, but I'm just a little maid living under someone else's roof in Clay Bottle Alley. I can't do anything and can't help much. However, if you, Chen Pinggan, want to borrow money, the problem can be solved with money. You are lucky. I have a little idea. Chen Pinggan smiled bitterly. It's really about money. I'll be frank with you. Liu Xianyang was severely injured by someone at the covered bridge. The old shopkeeper of the Yang family's shop went to take a look, but he couldn't do anything about it. GQ looked confused. Why haven't I heard about this? Who did Liu Xianyang offend? Chen Pinggan said helplessly, he's a foreigner from a place called Zhengyang Mountain. GQ asked tentatively, so you want to use your connections to find a good place for Liu Xianyang to be buried? This is not difficult. I can ask my young master to speak to the supervising officer, and then let the Yamen office steward and gatekeeper step forward to invite old Fat Wei to find a place. As long as it is not a mountain in a forbidden area of the imperial court, it should not be difficult. Chen Pinggan's face, which was already dark, became even darker. GQ also realized that she was thinking wrongly. She habitually bared her teeth, revealing her snow-white and neat teeth. She leaned against the Spring Festival couplets on the wall, tilted her head, and smiled playfully. She asked, Chen Pinggan, you want me to repay you for saving my life? But I'm just a maid. Even the old shopkeeper of the Yang family's shop couldn't do anything. What can I do? Chen Pinggan struggled for a while, then slowly said, Wang Zhu, I know you are not an ordinary person. That year, when I saw you at the door of my house, I knew you were different from us. Later, you were also the first person to see that the snake gallstone was not ordinary. Now that I think about it, the way you looked at us, your neighbors, was no different from how those foreigners look at us. The young girl grinned. Actually, there is. I don't only look at you mortals, I also look down on those immortal cultivators. However, GQ didn't say this out loud. Some principles, to her, were right and proper, but to others, they were arrogant and unruly. Chen Pinggan asked, I came to you because I wanted to ask if there was a chance to save Liu Xianyang. I used a locust tree leaf, and at that time, I could only barely keep Liu Xianyang alive. Although it wasn't very useful, at least it was useful. So I wanted to ask if you have any locust tree leaves, especially extra locust tree leaves. The young girl pointed at her own nose and asked, "Are you asking if my family's young master, Song Jisin, has locust tree leaves, or me, a little maid without parents?" Chen Pinggan stared at the young girl and said bluntly, "Even if Song Jisin has them, he won't give them to me. I'm asking you, Wang Zhu. If you have them, are you willing to lend them to me? If you don't, do you know any other ways to save Liu Xianyang?" The young girl, who was always called Wang Zhu, rubbed her chin with one hand and patted her abdomen with the other. She shook her head and said, "No, I really don't. I'm not lying to you. If you had come earlier, maybe there would have been a few locust tree leaves left. As for other ways, of course I don't have them. I'm not an immortal, so how would I know how to bring someone back to life, right? Chen Pinggan, you can't force me. Alas, I was wrong about you. I thought you were different from them, not the kind of person who would force others to repay their kindness." Chen Pinggan still didn't give up. "You really don't have them? Whether or not I can do it, you can tell me." Ji Qiu shook her head and said firmly, "In any case, I don't have them." Chen Pinggan smiled. "I know." The teenager turned and left. His thin figure quickly disappeared from Clay Bottle Alley. The young girl stood in the alley in front of her house, looking at the back of the teenager who was gradually disappearing. Her expression was complicated, with a trace of sadness for his misfortune and anger for his failure to fight. She said angrily, "You squandered the locust tree leaves that were hard to get. Then you can die with Liu Xianyang. Anyway, the sooner you die, the sooner you can reincarnate. If you're lucky, you can continue to be a fellow sufferer in your next life. It's better than those pitiful creatures who don't even have a next life." The young girl walked back to the courtyard. When she crossed the threshold, she accidentally burped again and sneered, "I'm a little full." She suddenly sped up and rushed forward, stomping heavily on the ground. Then she slowly squatted down and stared at the khaki-colored four-legged snake with horns on its head. She reprimanded, "It's not difficult to return what you borrowed. You 5 little beasts, if you dare to go back on your words in the future, I'll skin you alive and stew you." The four-legged snake under the maidservant's feet struggled with all its might and made a slight hiss, as if it was begging for mercy. After Chen Pinggan left Clay Bottle Alley, he ran all the way to the school. However, he was told by an old man who was in charge of cleaning the school that Mr. Chi had gone to the mountains outside the town with 3 foreign guests yesterday. He said that he was going to explore the secluded and strange places, and that it would take at least 3 days to go back and forth. Chen Pinggan was disappointed. When he turned to leave, the old man with the broom suddenly remembered something. He stopped the teenager and said, "By the way, before Mr. Chi left, he told me that if someone was looking for him in Clay Bottle Alley, I should tell that teenager." He had already said the reason. Whether he was in the school today or not, the result would not change. The teenager seemed to have known the result. His eyes were dim. Stagnant water rippled slightly, lifeless. But the teenager still bowed and thanked the old man. "Thank you, sir." The old man quickly moved a few steps away and stood aside. He waved his hand and smiled, "I don't deserve to be called sir." The old man watched the teenager slowly leave. After walking for a while, he seemed to raise his arm and wipe his eyes. The old man gently shook his head. He thought of his peers, Song Jisin and Zhao Yarrow, who were about the same age as him. Then he looked at the teenager. His life experiences were worlds apart. It was true that some people were proud of their success, while others were troubled. Chen Pinggan went to Clay Bottle Alley and picked up the last bag of copper coins hidden in the clay pot. He took 3 bags of money and walked into Fulu Street to find the kill supervisor's office. After hearing the introduction, the gatekeeper was a little confused. Song Jisin's neighbor in Clay Bottle Alley was looking for Song Jisin and the supervisor. Chen Pinggan secretly handed him a gold copper coin that he had prepared in advance without saying anything. The gatekeeper looked down, weighed it in his hand, and rubbed it with 2 fingers. He understood tacitly, but was not in a hurry to express his opinion. The teenager quickly handed over another gold coin. The gatekeeper smiled but did not take it. He said, "Since you're a sensible person, I'll be relieved to recommend you. Otherwise, if I lose this job because of you, I'll be a fool. Keep the copper coin in your hand first. If the steward agrees to let you enter the office, you can give it to me. If not, I can't help even if I want to. I'll just take it that this copper coin has no fate with me. What do you think? Chen Pinggan nodded vigorously. Not long after, the old steward and the gatekeeper arrived together. The gatekeeper gave the teenager a look, hinting that he should not take out a copper coin at this time. Taking a bribe in public was not a small crime. Fortunately, the teenager did not do anything stupid. He only followed the steward to the back hall of the office. The gatekeeper sighed. He was a little confused. Why did the steward agree as soon as he heard that it was the teenager from Clay Bottle Alley? When did the threshold to enter the office become so low? The gatekeeper felt a little guilty. In fact, when he saw the steward just now, his words were both overtly and covertly advising the steward not to let the young man enter the yamen. However, he didn't say it directly. He believed that with the steward's many years of cultivation in the yamen, he would definitely be well aware of it. The young gatekeeper's original plan was to take a copper coin for free. He did not need to take any risks and he could take it with a clear conscience. Now, he only hoped that the poor teenager was not a troublemaker. In the main hall of the back hall of the office, a tall man in a white robe sat on the main seat and drank tea. Song Jisin sat on the guest chair on the left. He played with a bamboo fan with one hand, opening and closing it repeatedly. He smiled at the teenager who was brought in. It was a stark contrast between the jet-black chair and the snow-white robe. The steward left. The man on the main seat put down his teacup and smiled at the teenager. Chen Pinggan, sit anywhere you like. We have actually met in Clay Bottle Alley before. It's just that I didn't recognize you at that time. Otherwise, I would have greeted you long ago. Song Jisin found it a little funny. Only he knew that when this man referred to himself as I, it was obviously a little awkward. The teenager sat on the chair opposite Song Jisin. The man went straight to the point and asked, Chen Pinggan, are you here because of Liu Xianyang's injury? The teenager stood up and said, I hope that Lord Song can punish the murderer of Xingyang Mountain severely and not just expel him. The man smiled. Actually, this town is a lawless place. It means that there are no imperial laws here. The supervising officer is already in an awkward position. He has no right to interfere with local affairs. Moreover, this town has always followed the principle of if the people don't report, the officials won't investigate. Whether it's the killing of a servant in a big house or the beating of a servant in a small house, there's no custom of coming to the supervising office to complain. Therefore, Chen Pinggan, you've brought a pig's head to the wrong temple and worshipped the wrong bodhisattva. The man's words and actions were pleasant. He did not have any arrogant attitude. Chen Pinggan took out 3 bags of copper coins and placed them on the high stool beside the chair. Then, he said to the man with a calm expression, Lord Song, I know you're very powerful. I want to know if you can save Liu Xianyang. Even if you can't save him, can you give him justice? Don't let the murderer kill him. As long as he leaves this town, everything will be fine. The man laughed. I'm very powerful. Did that black-clothed girl tell you that? Yes, it's obvious that she's very talented in martial arts. She's even better than your friend Liu Xianyang. To tell you the truth, I only know how to kill. I'm really not good at saving people. What's more, why should I break the 1,000-year-old rule of this place for the sake of a young man I've only met once? At this point, the man pointed at the 3 bags of copper coins. Without the treasured armor and sword scripture, Liu Xianyang's life is not worth this much money. As for buying my favor, this money is far from enough. I, Dali, have a falling out with Xingyang Mountain just for 3 bags of money. It's absolutely impossible. If this spreads out, I'll be the laughingstock of the entire Eastern Aquarius continent. Chen Pinggan, you may not understand this for the time being, but if you have a chance in the future, you'll understand this is the truth. Chen Pinggan gritted his teeth and said, Lord Song, can you tell me how I can help? Even if you think I can't do it even if I die, Lord Song can tell me. The man did not feel that he had revealed any clues. A hint of surprise appeared in the eyes of this powerful vassal. He smiled and said, Chen Pinggan, I'm not looking down on you or deliberately making things difficult for you. On the contrary, I think you're an interesting person. That's why I'm willing to spend time to reason with you and do business with you calmly. Do you understand? Chen Pinggan nodded. Song Jisin's sitting posture was not elegant. He sat cross-legged on the chair and gently patted his knees with a folded fan. He watched the fire burning on the other side of the river and did not care if it had nothing to do with him. Song Jianqiang did not care about Song Jisin's inattentiveness. In the small town, this vassal knew a lot of information, only losing to Qi Jingchun. He finally said, Chen Pinggan, you don't have to be too guilty and mistakenly think that your friend died because of you, because Liu Xianyang has already been trapped in a deadlock. As long as this young man refuses to hand over the sword manual, it can only be a dead knot because Jingyang Mountain will definitely kill him. No one can stop Qi Jingchun or Master Wan. It's not that no one can beat the old ape, but the price to pay is too high. It's not worth it. The man took a sip of tea and said leisurely, Chen Pinggan, have you ever thought about why even you, who should not have received the blessing of the ancestors, got a locust tree leaf? Liu Xianyang's talent is so good, but he didn't get a locust tree leaf. Have you ever thought about this question? Chen Pinggan said, sorry to disturb you, Sir Song. The straw sandals teenager put away the 3 bags of copper coins and said goodbye to the supervisor in front of him. Although Song Jianqiang did not ask him to stay, he actually stood up to see him off. Song Jisin was just about to stand up unwillingly when he saw the uncle shake his head slightly. He then sat back down and leaned comfortably on the back of the chair. When he reached the threshold, Song Jianqiang said without warning, there are 2 things that I can do, but I can't do. So if you can do one of them, I can consider helping you teach the old ape a lesson. The teenager quickly stopped and turned around with a solemn face. The man said indifferently, one is to find an opportunity to kidnap the little girl of Jingyang Mountain who is with the old ape. You can disturb her mind and force the old ape to stay in the small town. The other thing is to secretly cut down the old locust tree at night and pull out the iron chain of the iron lock well. You can do both, or you can do only one. If you do one thing, I'll help you seriously injure the murderer. If you do both, I'll kill the old ape of Jingyang Mountain for you. Song Jianqiang smiled and promised, since I've said it, I won't go back on my word. Then, the powerful king of Dali said something inexplicable, Chen Pinggan, I believe you can sense the truth of this sentence. The teenager left silently. Song Changjing didn't see or hear the youth beating his chest vigorously and spouting nonsense. Instead, he felt that it was normal. Standing at the door with his back facing Song Jisin, he asked, you're closer to him. Do you think he'll do it? Song Jisin shook his head and said, it's hard to say. Under normal circumstances, it'll be very difficult for him to do something against his will. However, if it's for Liu Xianyang, it'll be a little difficult. The man stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Looking at the sky, he asked, if the young man really brings a pleasant surprise, I'll take this opportunity to intervene. Regardless of whether it's forming a good relationship with Jingyang Mountain or forming an alliance with Wind and Thunder Garden, I'll only choose one. It's even inevitable that I'll incur a grudge with the other party. Compared to me standing idly by and allowing the Great Li to maintain a neutral relationship with these 2 forces, which outcome do you think is better for the Great Li? Song Jisin stood up and patted the palm of his other hand with his folding fan. He paced slowly and said after thinking, in times of peace, I'll choose the latter. In times of chaos, I'll choose the former. Then the teenager smiled and said, whether the world outside the small town is in times of peace or chaos, at least you've made your choice, uncle. Song Jianqiang sneered and said, what can we do in times of peace? Do you want to be a peaceful dog that guards the house for scholars? Song Jianqiang turned his head and looked at the teenager with a stiff expression. I've already seen that this teenager is the real knot in your heart. Moreover, it'll be very difficult for you to resolve it in a short time. Once you leave the small town with this knot in your heart, it'll be detrimental to your future cultivation. Therefore, you'll be able to see with your own eyes how a pure teenager with a pure heart can become vicious and vulgar. When the time comes, you'll feel that it's meaningless to be angry with this kind of person. Song Jisin opened his mouth, But in the end, he didn't refute anything. In the end, he fell into deep thought. The man walked back into the house and sat on the main seat. He raised his head and drank all the tea in the cup. Most importantly, I'm playing this boring little game not only to find a lame reason to fish in troubled waters, but also to let you understand that on the path of cultivation you're about to embark on, anyone can be your enemy. For example, your uncle, Song Jankyung. The teenager was stunned. Song Jankyung sneered. Because of the knot in your heart, if you don't remove it with your own hands, there'll be no end of trouble. Like the wild grass in the wilderness, it'll grow again when the spring breeze blows. Song Jankyung ridiculed. Song Jisin, you're about to become His Royal Highness Dali, aren't you filled with grief and indignation? But what can you do now? Therefore, do you think you're any better than Chen Pingan, who's being played in the palm of his hand? Song Jisin stared fixedly at the man with a calm expression. The teenager's 5 fingers gripping the folding fan were exposed. The man sat upright on the chair, his eyes deep. He looked out of the house, as if talking to himself. In the future, the more people you meet, the more interesting things you'll discover. What good and evil will be repaid, what revenge will be repaid, what anger will splatter 3 feet of blood, what talented scholars and beautiful women have marriage in the end, it's all a delightful imagination of trash. That's why you have to rely on your own fists. Rely on me. Rely on your biological parents. I advise you to give up on this idea as soon as possible. Otherwise, taking you out of the town is tantamount to taking your corpse to the mass grave. The imperial family is also responsible for their own life and death. The teenager sweated profusely and slumped on the chair. Although the teenager hid his complacency deep after knowing his true identity, there was no difference in the way he treated people in the yamen. However, in the eyes of Song Jankyung, it was as if he was holding a demon mirror, reflecting a demon who had just transformed into a human form. Therefore, he could be reduced to ashes while talking and laughing. Song Jankyung looked into the distance. His line of sight seemed to have reached the southernmost tip of the eastern bottle continent, to the distant old dragon city. The king didn't know why, but he thought of a sentence. The human heart is a mirror. The cleaner it is, the more spotless it is, the more it can't withstand scrutiny. Song Changjing felt that although the scholars in the imperial court were long-winded and loathed by gods and ghosts, sometimes the great principles they spoke of were something that they, as martial artists who carried knives, would not be able to understand even if they lived for 1,000 years. Song Jankyung put away his thoughts and pointed to the south as if he was holding a halberd. Song Jisin, if you think what I said today is wrong, you can bear with it. Only when we reach Old Dragon City in the future, I will consider whether to listen to you or not. Dali Prince Song Jisin has returned to normal and said with a smile, I'll wait and see. At the entrance of the yamen, the teenager with straw sandals handed the gatekeeper the second copper coin as promised. In the 12-legged archway, Chen Pingan saw the black-clothed girl's figure and quickly ran to her. Ning Yarrow stood under the plaque with the words Fighting Bull and asked, How is it? Chen Pingan shook his head and said, I've looked for all 3 of them. 2 of them met. Mr. Chi didn't see them, but I knew the answer from the beginning. A gentleman doesn't save people. Mr. Chi did say it before. Ning Yarrow frowned and didn't say anything. Chen Pingan then told the girl to be careful and began to run away. He first went to the Yang family's shop and used a gold copper coin to buy a lot of medicine bottles, ointment, and herbs for internal injuries from an old man who knew him well. The teenager was familiar with how to use these things and how to make them. Making porcelain in the Dragon Kill was a job that relied on others to make a living, and there were often all kinds of accidents. Although old Yarrow didn't like Chen Pingan, who could only be regarded as half a disciple, he had to admit that the teenager's legs were nimble and he wasn't a scheming person. Therefore, he let Chen Pingan do a lot of errands and things that cost money, such as buying medicine for the injured at the entrance of the kill. Chen Pingan returned to his ancestral home in Mud Bottle Alley. After closing the door, he began to brew the medicine. It was a prescription for treating internal injuries. While waiting for the heat to mature, he placed a clean shirt that had been washed until it was white on the table and tore it into strips. The youth with straw sandals, who was known for his stinginess, did not feel the slightest bit of heartache. Then, in addition to tying the cloth-pressing knife that Ning Yarrow had lent him to his arm, the youth also tied layers of thin cotton strips around his calves and wrists. Chen Pinggan took down the self-made wooden bow on the wall. He hesitated for a moment, but still gave up on carrying it for the time being. Instead, he took the slingshot and a bag of stones from the windowsill. The reason why he didn't regret it even when he knew it was impossible and why he didn't regret it even when he hit a wall 3 times in a row was the teenager's unique stubbornness. The teenager wouldn't be satisfied if he didn't try. It was the same reason that the teenager begged the old shopkeeper to try again at the blacksmith shop for the last time. First, he looked for Ji Qiu, who had a strange identity, hoping to find a chance for Liu Xianyang. Then, he looked for Mr. Qi, hoping that he could uphold justice. Finally, he looked for Ning Yarrow's so-called Wu Dao Grand Master, Supervisor Song. It was obvious that he was going to lose everything to make a deal. The teenager thought very clearly from the beginning, so he was very disappointed at this time, but he didn't feel heartbroken. In fact, King Song Jiangqiang and his neighbor Song Jisin didn't understand Chen Pinggan at all. There were some things that must be done even in death. But there were some things that couldn't be done even in death. The teenager squatted in the corner, quietly waiting for the medicine soup to come out. This jar of medicine was very strange. It had no other use but to relieve pain. Once, there was a man at the entrance of the Dragon Kill who suffered from a strange disease. He stayed in bed for half a day. Not only was he half dead, but he was also in so much pain that his whole face and limbs were twisted. Later, the Yang family's shop gave him this prescription. In the end, the man died quickly, but he didn't die in pain. He even had the strength to sit up. After leaving his last words, he went to take a last look at the entrance of the kill with the help of Old Man Yao. Chen Pinggan felt that he should also need it. The teenager saw some pieces of cloth on the table, so he took off the pair of broken straw sandals on his feet and took out a pair of brand new shoes that he was reluctant to wear. He moved the jar and took out the broken porcelain pieces. About an hour later, the young man opened the door and quietly walked out of the clay bottle alley after finishing his work. It was close to dusk, and the sun was no longer dazzling. There were layers of fiery clouds in the sky, which was extremely gorgeous. The teenager with straw sandals walked to Fulu Street. There were no passers-by on the Bluestone Street. The teenager walked alone. 48. The young man with straw sandals had been sending letters to Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley these days. Almost all the gatekeepers knew who this messenger was, so he didn't seem out of place. In addition, the young man had a calm expression as he trotted along the Bluestone Street as usual. Even if someone saw him, they wouldn't think much of it. Chen Pinggan was near the door of a residence. In front of the door was a stone statue used to suppress evil spirits. It was half the height of a man and looked like a general. Chen Pinggan knew that this was the Li family's residence. On the wealthy Fulu Street, almost every household had different methods of warding off evil spirits. Even the door gods posted on the door were divided into civil and military, so it was easy to distinguish. He quickly looked around and continued to move forward. Further ahead was the Song family, and behind the Song family was the Bureau of Kill Affairs. There was a locust tree growing on the outer wall between the houses of the Li and Song families. It was old and dry, with thick branches and lush leaves. Although it was not as old as the old locust tree in the small town, it was still extraordinary. According to the older generation, this locust tree and the towering old locust tree in the center of the town were said to be of the same origin. That tree was called the ancestor locust tree, while the one in front of the young man was called the descendant locust tree. The reason why Chen Pinggan came to the Li residence instead of the Lu residence in the small town where Lu Zhengchun lived was because when he was leaving the Yamen, the elderly steward who saw him off casually chatted with him about family matters. He said that there was a scholar from the Zhao family on this street, that Zhao Yarrow had already left the small town and was destined to become a high-ranking official in the future. He also said that there was a young lady from the Song family next door who had reached marriageable age but couldn't even do needlework properly. She only liked to play with swords and spears. She didn't look like a rich young lady at all. Amidst the pile of trivial matters, the old man added a trivial piece of news. A distinguished guest had just arrived at the Lee residence. The little girl looked like she was carved from jade, like a piece of imperial porcelain. As long as she didn't change 18 times between childhood and womanhood, she would definitely be a charming beauty. He didn't know which family would be lucky enough to marry such a daughter-in-law into their family. On the way out of the Yaman's back hall, the young man who only listened and didn't speak at first intentionally or unintentionally walked very slowly. He also carefully observed the layout of the Yaman's buildings. In the end, he occasionally asked a few off-topic questions, like a pauper curious about the rich and wealthy families. The elderly steward told him everything he knew without reserve. Using the Song family next door and the Lee family further away as examples, he told the young man about the layout and various rules of the family. The young man was aware of the steward's real intention. However, from beginning to end, Chen Pinggan didn't intend to act according to their wishes. At this moment, he was jogging along the street. Seeing that there was no one around, Chen Pinggan suddenly sped up and ran straight to the old locust tree. With a leap, he actually took 4 steps up the tree trunk before showing signs of falling. However, at that time, the young man's body was strong enough to reach out and grab a branch of the locust tree. In an instant, the young man, who was as agile as a mountain monkey, sat on a horizontal branch. He then stood up steadily and continued to climb. In a few blinks of an eye, Chen Pinggan was squatting on a slanted locust tree branch, barely above the 2-jong high wall of the courtyard. The young man's body was hidden behind the lush locust tree leaves. He held his breath and focused his mind, squinting his eyes as he looked around. He was in no hurry to sneak in. On the way back to the small town from the covered bridge with Ning Yaro, Chen Pinggan asked many questions. For example, how fast could the old ape of Zhengyang Mountain run and jump under normal circumstances within the boundaries of the small town? How tough was its body exactly? How tough was its skin and bones? If a punch from me was no different from scratching an itch for the old ape, then how much damage would a slingshot or a wooden bow cause at a distance of 20 steps or 40 steps? Did the so-called immortal of Zhengyang Mountain have any fatal flaws, such as eyes, crotch, or throat? If my opponent tried to kill me with all his strength even at the risk of being injured, would I be dead for sure? At that time, Ning Yaro almost hated the fact that she wasn't deaf and mute from the young man's questions. According to the black-clothed girl, regardless of whether it was a Qi practitioner or a pure martial artist, the higher the level of the cultivator, the greater the pressure they would experience in this place. It was like how a cavalry could only defend to the death when knocking on a pass. They could only support themselves with a single breath. Once they opened their mouth, they would suffer the damage of being flooded by seawater. Just think about it. Faced with a violent flood, why don't you try opening a small hole in the dam? However, Ning Yaro's final conclusion was that if the young man fought the old ape of Zhengyang Mountain head-on, Chen Pinggan would have no chance of winning at all. In the shade of the pagoda tree, the young man's eyes were resolute and his face was cold. He mumbled to himself, "Don't let the old ape get within 10 steps. 10 steps. At the very least, I have to put some distance between us." Ning Yaro had said that as long as the old ape did not do anything desperate, there was still a chance for him to survive. However, Chen Pinggan's reply was that he had to force the old ape to kill him. Otherwise, it would be meaningless. He had to infuriate the old ape of Mount Zhengyang so much that the old ape would not hesitate to use his internal energy. Only then would he be able to truly consume the cultivation base that he had painstakingly accumulated over 1,000 years. Perhaps the old ape felt that the lives of townspeople like Liu Xianyang and himself were worthless, but Chen Pinggan really wanted to know if the old ape would feel heartache when he saw the cultivation base disappearing before his eyes, and if he still felt that it was worth it. Of course, the premise of all of this was that he was not killed by a single punch. The young man looked down at the people coming and going in the mansion and muttered, "Even if I can't escape, I have to take a few more punches." Chen Pinggan had never thought of killing the old ape, much less surviving. In the Li family's mansion, the young girl from Zhengyang Mountain was the granddaughter of the Dao family's patriarch. She was consecrated by the entire Li family like a bodhisattva. Apart from the first and second-class maidservants that the Lee family had arranged for in the courtyard, these young girls, who were children of the family, were clean and nimble. Most importantly, they knew each other well and had clean backgrounds. It was possible that they had been loyal to the Lee family since their ancestors. The courtyard was located in the middle and was not close to the streets of Fulu Street. The young girl's name was Dao Zi, and her nickname was Dao Zi. She was the source of joy for the sword-immortal patriarchs of Zhengyang Mountain. Of course, it was not because of her innocent and adorable appearance, but because of the height of her sword Dao in the future. She was qualified to make Zhengyang Mountain throw in massive amounts of resources for her. Over the past 500 years, Dao Zi's bone structure, talent, temperament, and luck were among the best among the patriarchs of the various peaks of Zhengyang Mountain. To put it simply, the little girl Dao Zi would be a miraculous existence with very long legs but no shortcomings. This was a true once-in-a-century encounter, and not a polite compliment that could be found on the streets. Without the mountain-moving ape by her side, the young girl was alone in a completely unfamiliar place. She was not afraid of strangers or stage fright. She was just a little bored and regretful. From Grandpa Ape's tone, it seemed like there was no way to move a mountain from here. This made the young girl very disheartened. When elder sister Su of Zhengyang Mountain ascended to the middle 5 realms, she was gifted a mountain by the patriarch as a gift. It became elder sister Su's private territory. Grandpa Ape had personally carried that mountain back to Zhengyang Mountain from afar and placed it in the north of Zhengyang Mountain. Although it was not big, the young girl had always been envious of it. She felt that the study was a little stuffy, so she walked to the main hall. She put her hands behind her back and looked up at the horizontal board for a long time like an elder. The young girl was followed closely by 2 delicate and pretty maidservants. One of them had been discovered by the Lee family as a child to have extraordinary talent. She was specially groomed into a martial artist and had made some achievements. In fact, to the direct descendants of the Lee family, this kind of behavior was no different from rearing flowers, birds, fishes, and insects. They did not hope that the young girl would become a martial arts grandmaster in the future. It was not unheard of for servants to bully their masters within the walls of a large family. Moreover, the servants had high standards and great potential. It might not be a good thing for the next generation of the family. The young girl walked to the gate and skipped around in the courtyard. She did not leave the courtyard without permission and make things difficult for the servants. Grandpa Ape had reminded her that the people from the Wind and Thunder Garden had also arrived in town. She could not leave the courtyard before he dealt with them. Although the young girl she had been exposed to the treacherous nature of cultivation in the mountains since she was young. Danger lurked everywhere. Moreover, her family education was extremely strict, so she was not a mischievous child who would make her elders worry. In the end, the bored young girl sprawled on the stone table. There was a bird cage on the table. It seemed to contain a bird called a snake-hunting eagle. Its head drooped and it looked sickly. Its feathers were gray and dull. It did not look good at all. No matter how the young girl teased it, the snake-hunting eagle ignored her, so she found it boring. Now that she had nothing better to do, she whistled at the feathered beast for fun. There were 2 porcelain bird food jars in the cage that the Lee family had privately forged in the dragon kill. They were small and exquisite. One was simple and elegant to hold water, while the other was brightly colored to hold food. However, after the snake-hunting eagle was captured, it did not touch a drop of water or a grain of rice. It had already been almost 2 days. In the small town, the snake-hunting eagle was rarely caught. Occasionally, whether it was a young bird or an adult snake-hunting eagle, without exception, they would all starve to death. No matter how hard they tried, they could not be raised, let alone become a hunting eagle that could be controlled by people. Seeing that the snake-hunting eagle still did not respond, the young girl who was whistling finally lost her patience. She stood up and turned to leave. There was a loud bang. One of the bird food jars in the birdcage shattered violently. The young girl first appeared sluggish for a moment. Then, almost instinctively, she pulled over a tall servant girl and had her stand in front of her. The tall and plump servant girl only felt that her wrist was tightly bound by an iron wire. It was so painful that she almost screamed out loud. However, the shorter servant girl had sharp eyes. She stood in front of the young girl at the first moment and quickly looked around. The second bird food jar in the cage exploded with a loud bang, like a firecracker on the table. "There's an assassin on the roof of the Pure Fragrance courtyard." The servant girl who had practiced martial arts finally caught sight of the figure. On the roof of the courtyard next door, there was a half-squatting figure. The servant girl began to run. The wall of the courtyard was not very high. She stepped on it and grabbed the edge of the wall with both hands. Relying on her outstanding strength, she quickly climbed to the top of the wall. For a moment, she was in a bit of a dilemma. This courtyard was not far from the Pure Fragrance courtyard, but the assassin was on the roof of the main building of the Pure Fragrance courtyard, and the Pure Fragrance courtyard was close to Fulu Street. That person could easily jump over the wall. Therefore, in a flash, she made a decision. She did not jump down the wall and run to the Pure Fragrance courtyard. Instead, she ran along the wall like a cat and jumped onto the roof of her courtyard. During this time, the servant girl was always on the lookout for the assassin's sneak attack. Very strangely, the assassin did not obstruct her steps, nor did he have any intention of immediately retreating. The eaves of the two courtyards were about 10 meters apart. The servant girl watched the assassin's movements as she quietly retreated from the eaves. Finally, she quickly took a deep breath and prepared to run. The servant girl was greatly shocked. The assassin who was confronting her from afar was actually a shabbily dressed, thin youth. The youth's waist was tied with 2 small luggage bags. She could not see the murder weapon in his hands, so he must have hidden it. The servant girl felt that it was most likely a slingshot. She was also very doubtful. If it hit her head, she dared not say that she would die on the spot, but she would definitely be seriously injured. With the youth's almost terrifying accuracy, he had intentionally smashed the bird food jar twice. Could he really not hit her or the little girl from Xinjiang Mountain? In the courtyard, the little girl angrily said, "Idiot. Be careful of the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Come back quickly." Of course, it was important to catch the assassin and extort a confession from him. However, it was more important to prevent any accidents and preserve one's life. After the little girl let go of the tall servant girl's arm, she raised her hand and fiercely slapped the frightened girl awake. "And you, quickly go and inform the others. Do you know that if I die, everyone in this house will die as well?" The servant girl on the roof did not immediately jump into the courtyard. Instead, she called out loudly, "There's an assassin." Then she began to run wildly. She jumped from the edge of the eaves and began to leap towards the roof of the Qingshan courtyard. The assassin had roughly determined the strength of her arms, legs, and strength from the servant girl's series of climbing and running movements. He crouched down and picked up 2 tiles. He threw his right hand, which happened to hit the girl's head. While still in the air, the girl instinctively crossed her arms in front of her head. Then, with 2 bangs, the servant girl felt a piercing pain. The force was far greater than the servant girl had imagined. Her forward momentum was immediately greatly impeded. Just as she regretted trying to be brave, the servant girl, who had barely landed on the eaves, was punched in the abdomen and fell backwards. However, the assassin inexplicably grabbed one of her ankles. After a slight pause, the youth let go. The servant girl did not land safely, but at least she was not heavily injured. Her head was a mess. Out of the corner of his eye, the youth had been looking around. When he saw black spots appear around him, he began to turn and run. His speed was fast, his steps were large, and his rhythm was good. Especially his breathing was just right. If the maidservant could see this, she would definitely think that this youth was like her. He had been practicing martial arts for many years and was immersed in it for a long time. He was definitely not an amateur. On the roof, the youth's figure quickly disappeared. He was like a light bird, a snake-hunting eagle out of its cage. About half an hour later, the burly old man hurried back to the Li family's mansion, full of murderous intent. From the head of the Li family, Li Hong, to the servant girls in the courtyard, no one dared to breathe loudly. Especially the servant girl who practiced martial arts. She knelt on the ground, her cheeks red and swollen. The servant girl did not say a word. She did not dare to show any resentment. The little girl, who had calmed down as usual, sighed when she saw the old man. She shook her head and lectured, "Grandpa Ape, the people of the Lee family seem to be a bunch of trash. How dare you entrust me to them?" The mountain-moving ape knelt on one knee. He was still taller than the little girl. The white-haired old man said guiltily, "Miss, I was wrong." The old man turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Li Hong, the head of the Li family in the small town, roughly understood the orthodox language of the eastern bottle continent. Coincidentally, the language of the cultivators of Zhengyang Mountain was the same. This man, whose words carried enormous weight in the family, could only smile bitterly and apologize. This is indeed the fault of the Li family. We can't shirk our responsibility. According to the information we have so far, it's a youth. He's most likely not a cultivator. The Yamen hasn't given us any useful intelligence for the time being. They only said that they'll send more capable people to guard the mansion day and night." Daozi thought for a moment and said, "That assassin doesn't seem to be here to kill me." Then she added, "At least not today." The head of the Li family, who was just about to calm down, immediately felt his heart in his throat again. The white ape frowned and asked, "Is that youth thin, dark-skinned, and about this height?" And wearing straw sandals?" The servant girl kneeling on the ground nodded vigorously. The white ape grinned. His eyes were gloomy. "Good fellow. So he's here to provoke us." He waved his hand and said, "Don't get involved in this matter. I know the background of that assassin. He's an ordinary youth in Mud Bottle Alley." The little girl whispered, "Grandpa Ape, don't let your guard down." The mountain-moving ape hesitated for a moment, then stood up and ordered the head of the Li family, then let the Yamen take out a household file and send it to the Li family. "Check the background of that youth's 18 generations of ancestors. Then, in terms of the manpower to guard this courtyard, it's easy to have fewer people, not easy to have more people, but more people." The old man quietly increased his tone and sneered, "Li Hong, I advise you to ask your family's stabilizing force to come out as well. Don't treat this matter lightly. If something really happens to my family's young lady here, even I, an old beast in your eyes, can't shoulder the responsibility, let alone you, a branch of the Li family." The head of the Li family hurriedly bowed and apologized. He said anxiously, "Ancestor Ape, you're asking too much of the Li family." The mountain-guarding ape of Zhengyang Mountain fell into deep thought and murmured, "Is it that kid from the Wind and Thunder Garden who took the opportunity to pick a fight? Or is it Song Jianqiang of the Yamen's plan?" The old man shook his head in the end, only finding it ridiculous. No matter who instigated him to court death, you don't know how to find a better pawn to cross the river. A little grasshopper without much meat. Are you trying to fill the gap between your teeth? Well, I was worried about not having a chance to kill. This is a good reason. I'll kill that bumpkin from Mud Bottle Alley first, then I'll kill you, the little bastard from the Wind and Thunder Garden." The old man smiled at the little girl and said, "My lady, I'll help you clean up the mess this time. There won't be any more accidents." The little girl smiled brightly and raised her fist to boost the morale of the mountain-guarding ape of Zhengyang Mountain. Before the old man left, he looked at the head of the Li family. The latter smiled bitterly and said, "I'll go and ask the ancestor to come out and be Miss Dao's personal retainer." The old man nodded and strode away. The old man took the bait casually and directly followed the fishing line to Mud Bottle Alley. "I've clearly taken the bait. You can come and kill me." If they were outside the town, the mountain-moving ape of Zhengyang Mountain would not dare to be so arrogant. However, in this world, spells, divine abilities, and artifacts were all forbidden, so he had a huge advantage. This was also the reason why Zhengyang Mountain did not send out a sword immortal patriarch. The old ape walked all the way and only realized this when he approached Mud Bottle Alley. The youth in the alley can't be here purely to avenge his friend, right? Before this, the old ape had been thinking deeper about the conspiracy involving the concealing line of grass ash that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Now that he suddenly realized this possibility, he found it especially preposterous. The old ape smiled and quickly understood the reason. If that's the case, it makes sense. That's right. Since he's not a cultivator, he's not that afraid of death. It's just a cheap life anyway. However, to be careful, the old ape still did not swagger into Mud Bottle Alley from this end. Regardless, this trip was destined to not be in vain. The little bastard who was valued by the Wind and Thunder Garden would only live a little longer than the bumpkin from Mud Bottle Alley. After taking a huge detour, the old ape walked into Mud Bottle Alley from the corner of an alley near Jiu Kan's house. In fact, the old ape was very suspicious of whether the assassin youth had the courage to stay in the ancestral home and wait for death. If he was smart and cowardly, he could have died after the young man from the Wind and Thunder Garden. The old ape grinned. Then, his smile instantly froze. In the dusk, Mud Bottle Alley already appeared dark and blurry. The burly old man suddenly looked up. For some reason, a thin youth was standing at a high spot in front of the alley. His feet were stepping on the holes that had just been dug out not long ago, allowing him to leverage himself. The youth carried a quiver of arrows on his back and held a fully drawn wooden bow in his hand. The tip of the arrow was pointed at one of the old ape's eyeballs. The youth was completely silent. Not only was the bow drawn to a full moon, even the slightest of breaths seemed to have disappeared. As a result, the ancestral guardian of Zhengyang Mountain could only rely on his keen sense of danger to detect the youth above him. He did not give the old ape any chance to react. The arrow whistled through the air like a gust of wind. It was powerful and heavy. After shooting the arrow, the youth did not make a second choice. He shrunk his neck and quickly hung the wooden bow diagonally on his shoulder. He exerted force with the tip of his feet and crossed the walls on both sides to borrow the momentum to climb up the eaves. The old ape pulled back the palm that was blocking his forehead. The arrow was nailed into his palm. It was not deep and a wound could be vaguely seen. However, the old ape was still scared. If he had been shot in the eye by someone close to him in the small town, it would have been a tragedy where he would not be able to call for help. He pulled out the arrow casually and snapped it, dropping it to the ground in Mud Bottle Alley. The old man clenched his fists and looked up at the sky in the alley. His face was ashen and his throat moved as he let out a low and suppressed sound, like an extremely angry ancient beast. The old man used both his hands and feet to climb up to the roof in an instant. However, as soon as he popped his head out, a second arrow arrived. The old man who was already on guard only raised his hand casually and allowed the arrow to pierce into his arm a little. He then strode forward with a ferocious smile. The youth put away the wooden bow again and turned to run. A series of cracking sounds could be heard from the continuous eaves on one side of Mud Bottle Alley. The old man's strides were much bigger than the youth's after all. He gradually closed the distance and would soon catch up to the thin youth, who was already agile enough. The old man exerted force in an instant and soared into the air to pounce forward. A giant hand that was the size of a palm leaf fan reached for the youth's head. The youth seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. At the critical moment, he twisted his waist and bent his body like a cat before he turned and jumped to the roof on the opposite side of the alley. After landing softly, he continued to run wildly. The old ape was extremely agile as well. He also turned to the roof on the other side of Mud Bottle Alley on his right. The youth stopped abruptly. By the time the old ape realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. It turned out that the roof was unoccupied and had been in disrepair for a long time. How could it withstand the old ape's 200-kilogram jump? With a crash, the old ape fell into the house together with the tiles. The old ape landed on the ground with a loud crash. After supporting himself with one hand, he twisted his head and dodged the tricky and insidious arrow. The arrow was directly nailed into the ground. It was evident that it was not that the youth was not strong enough, but that the old ape was too tough. The youth stood at the edge of the big hole in the roof and put away his wooden bow skillfully. He raised his middle finger at the old ape and cursed, "Old bastard. F***CKU. The youth's face suddenly turned strange. He slapped himself and mumbled, "I'm the one who's at a disadvantage." The old ape stood up abruptly, but the youth was already far away. 49. In a pile of broken tiles, the old ape's ears twitched when he heard the slightest noise. He grinned and bent down to pick up a broken tile. After weighing it in his hand, he stood up and threw it out quickly. The tile pierced through the wall and the roof easily like a knife cutting through tofu. It pierced through the air with the sound of wind and thunder. The tile was headed to the place where the sound came from. Unfortunately, the old ape did not see any trace of the young man. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his burly body rose from the ground. He stepped on the beam of an old house and used the rebounding force to leap out of the hole in the roof, landing on the ridge of the roof. The old ape saw that the young man with a wooden bow on his back was standing on the ridge of a roof far away. He was looking at the old ape in white solemnly. The old ape knew that he had miscalculated. When he threw the tile earlier, he had caused too much of a ruckus. He had probably alerted the young man from Clay Bottle Alley and made him realize that something was wrong. He no longer had the thought of taking advantage of the distance advantage of the bow and arrow. The old ape opened his hands with a smile, indicating that there was nothing in his hands. Then, he hooked his finger, indicating that the young man could continue playing fancy tricks. He was willing to play with him to the end and continue to stretch his body. If the old man was playing tricks, he would be wronging the guardian ape of Zhengyang Mountain. After 1,000 years of cultivation, he had grown to a height of 3,000 meters. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his movement techniques were indomitable. In the long years of the mountain-moving ape's path of cultivation, especially in the early days when Zhengyang Mountain was established, the weak mountain had enemies everywhere. After the founder of Zhengyang Mountain died in battle, as the top general, what kind of bloody battles had the old ape not experienced? The small fight on the roof of the alley today was actually similar to the battles in the past. In the soul-stirring battles back then, the top cultivators and great chi trainers also used magical equipment to pin down the old ape from afar. They did not dare to fight him head-on at all. It was just like the light cavalry of the great Qing dynasty that came and went like the wind on the battlefield of the mortal world. They would never directly load the heavy-armored soldiers of the Dali dynasty. Instead, they would cut the meat slowly and look for opportunities to slowly chip away at the surface of the iron barrel battle formation. Apart from Song Jianqiang, the old ape could be considered one of the characters suppressed by the heavenly axiom the most. Due to his special status, the military grandmaster with the tiger tally had been favored by the world. As a result, while his cultivation was extraordinary, his influence was not obvious. At this moment, the old macaque found the thrill of fighting bloody battles in the past when it faced a young man who was different from ordinary townsfolk. The old macaque did not deny that the young man had given it a lot of surprises. He knew how to calculate people's hearts, how to set up traps, and how to make use of the geographical advantage. Of course, the most important thing was that he was quite bold. The old macaque lifted its head to look at the sky. The sun was setting in the west, and dusk had arrived. Their vision would be affected more and more. Furthermore, he was completely unfamiliar with the town's geography. This was probably one of the young man's trump cards. It could be considered a protective talisman. The old macaque began to run wildly like a galloping horse. He could cover a distance of over 3 meters with a single step, which was shocking. The moment the old macaque made a move, the young man turned and ran. He did not follow the endless alleys and ridges to the north. After all, there were Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley, where the rich and powerful gathered. If someone stood up for the old macaque, Chen Pingan did not think that he would be able to escape the encirclement. As a result, Chen Pingan fled to the west decisively. The south was in the direction of the covered bridge, where the view was broad and there was nowhere to hide. According to the comparison of their speed, Chen Pingan estimated that it would be very difficult for him to escape the mountain-moving ape's pursuit once he lost the cover. To the west of the town were deep mountains and old forests. The vegetation was lush, and there were many traps set down by hunters on many secret paths. The mountain path was difficult to traverse. If one did not follow the old paths, it would be extremely difficult. Chen Pingan knew this better than anyone. The young man was not wrong, but he had underestimated the old macaque. As the guardian ape of Zhengyang Mountain, the old macaque had a much deeper understanding of the mountains and rivers than the young man. When the young man leaped off the last roof and landed on the ground, he bent his knees to deftly offset part of the falling force. He quickly turned his head to glance at the scenery behind him before he continued to charge forward with his back bent. As he ran, the wooden bow and quiver disappeared without a trace. In the mountain forest, if Chen Pinggan chose to abandon the paths that his ancestors had treaded for generations and ran in a random direction in a panic, they would definitely become a burden. Seeing that the young man was about to enter the water, the old macaque became rather agitated. It looked back in the direction of the Li family's house on Fulu Street. As a matter of fact, once they entered the mountain, the old macaque would not dare to say that he had the geographical advantage, but it would definitely be more comfortable than running around with the little brat in the town. The old macaque made up its mind and quickly weighed the pros and cons. It took in a deep breath of fresh air. It was just enough to kill if there was not too much deviation. Blue and purple ripples appeared on the old macaque's face, and its burly body rose from the ground without a sign. Half of the pitiful house under its feet collapsed because of its stomp. Fortunately, the people living on the west side of the town were poor, and the houses here were much thinner than the buildings on Fulu Street. For example, the wood used for the beams and pillars was not enough to make the houses look good. Fortunately for the family of 4 in the house, none of them were in the house at the moment. The old macaque leaped high and drew a huge arc in the air. When it landed, it happened to land beside the young man. 2 large pits appeared where its feet landed, and soft spring mud splattered everywhere. The old macaque punched the young man's back. The various yang scriptures were located on the human back, so both the meridians and organs were connected to the back. In particular, the back was only an inch away from the heart, so it was the most fragile part. His life was hanging by a thread. Hearing the noise beside him, the young man suddenly exerted his strength. He was 2 to 3 times faster than when he lured the old macaque to step on the rotten roof. This at least meant that the young man had been hiding his strength from the beginning to the end. As a result, not only did the old macaque's punch not penetrate the young man's back and failed to crush his heart, it only grazed the young man's back an inch below his back. Although the young man did not take the punch head-on, he was still sent flying with his feet off the ground as if he had been hit by a hammer. In the next scene, the young man's breathtaking agility were vividly displayed. Blood trickled down the corner of the straw sandals boy's mouth. After being sent flying by the punch, he was supposed to fall flat on his face. However, the moment the boy extended his hands and placed them on the ground, he bent his elbows and exerted force. His entire body flipped in the air in one smooth motion. After landing on the ground with both feet, he used the inertia of his forward momentum to continue fleeing without slowing down at all. Even the experienced mountain-moving ape could not help but have a toothache when it saw the town's young man's tenacity. The old macaque raised its hand. The back of its hand was bloody. The injury was nothing, so the old macaque dismissed it with a smile. Nevertheless, it became more determined to kill the young man. As for why it was injured, it was not complicated. It was chilly in spring. The young man from the shabby alley, who was wearing thin clothes, was clearly wearing thicker clothes when he appeared in front of the old macaque. Apart from his own clothes, he also found Liu Xianyang's loose old clothes and put them on the outermost layer. Between the 2 clothes, there was something else. As it turned out, the young man had made a wooden porcelain armor for himself. 6 long wooden planks were drilled and connected with silk ropes. There were 3 planks in front of his chest and 3 on his back. Most importantly, the extremely crude wooden armor was embedded with tiny porcelain shards. The old macaque felt terrible at the moment. It was like a high-ranking official who had accidentally stepped on a piece of stinky dog poop, and it could not get rid of it for a while. The old macaque clenched its fists. It held its breath and stood where it was, suppressing the surging qi in its body. The purplish-green ripples on its face turned purplish-gold and disappeared in a flash. The old macaque flew into a rage. As it turned out, a stone shot out from the forest at this moment. The old macaque reached out and grabbed the particularly hard stone. It was the size of a fingernail. Then, there was a series of rustling sounds, indicating that the young man was fleeing into the depths of the forest. The old macaque's face was extremely gloomy. It turned its head and looked at the night sky of the town. It was afraid that this was the young man's real plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain. However, The old macaque's intuition told it that it would be best to quickly kill the young man in straw sandals in the mountains. The young assassin had just climbed the highest branch of the Chinese scholar tree on Fulu Street. It could now bear the weight of a person. It was much higher than the roof, and there was another uninvited guest sitting there. A little further down, there was another person standing. The sudden appearance of these two people made the frightened Li family residents pinch their noses and pretend that they did not see them. This was because the white-robed man sitting there was none other than the supervisor. He brought Song Jisin to the Chinese scholar tree, saying that he wanted to bring him to watch a good show. However, it was already the end of the evening. Song Jisin's eyesight was not good enough, so he could only listen to Song Jianqiang narrate the laughable pursuit that began on the roof of Clay Bottle Alley. The man rested one hand on his knee and the other on his cheek as he looked into the distance. In between the narration of the pursuit, he would occasionally interject some secret matters of the town that no one knew, or some random cultivation insights that he had. If we don't talk about opportunities and only talk about artifacts and artifacts, that famous sword manual that has been rumored for a long time can be ranked in the top 3 of the town. If we look at the timeline and put into the town's 3,000 years of history, it might be a little difficult for it to be ranked in the top 10, but it's definitely not a problem for it to be ranked in the top 20. Don't think that this ranking is low. In fact, it's very high. In addition to that Swansea armor, if the young man surnamed Liu can digest all of this, in my opinion, his opportunities won't be any worse than the 5 of you. Song Jisin did not look up, because there was a guy directly hanging his foot above the young man's head. The young man curiously asked, then why was he killed by the elder ape of Xinjiang Mountain with one punch? Song Jianqiang smiled faintly and said, his luck is too good. He is envied by others, and he has no backing. Is it difficult to understand? Song Jisin's face was full of doubts and asked, then why didn't you rope him in more thoroughly when you were in Clay Bottle Alley? The king of Dali above the young man's head laughed and was extremely happy. He laughed for a long time before he said, as for those cultivation geniuses on the mountain. Anyway, when you go out and hear one of my nicknames, you will understand the reason. Song Jianqiang suddenly stood up and looked into the distance. His expression changed slightly. He gently stroked the jade belt on his waist with one hand, and his eyes were burning. In the eyes of this martial arts grandmaster, who was almost at the peak of the mountain, the aura in the westernmost part of the town was turbulent as the mountain-moving ape broke the rules. So much so that the aura in that area was chaotic, like a broken porcelain that had exploded and splashed. Song Jianqiang slowly said, you may be wondering why those foreigners have the look of looking at others as if they are ants. Do you really think this is just their natural conceit? Do they have eyes in the sky? Personality is a small part of the reason, but more of it is the general trend. You have never been out of the town, so you don't know the transcendent status of these immortal masters in the outside world. Song Jisin replied, I am not surprised at all. It is hard to chat with people who have read books. Song Jianqiang was not surprised. He continued to say, because there is a line between you and them. This line isn't that big, but to some people, it's even smaller than a small ditch. As long as you encounter it, you can cross it. Just like you, Liu Xianyang, and that scholar Zhao Yao, who was chosen by a major Taoist sect from another continent, are all in this category. But it is not small either. Most people in the town look at that line as if they are facing a natural moat, and they don't even have the desire to cross it. The gap between the two groups of people separated by that line is actually like the gap between people and plants. It is no different from the gap between yin and yang, or even bigger. At this point, the king of Li suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Then, he gloated and said, that old beast is a little unlucky this time. He just had to provoke such a little hedgehog. He's really good at concealing his strength. Song Jisin, I understand you a little now. Anyone who has such an opponent will feel uncomfortable. Except for killing him with a clean punch, it is really a disgusting and troublesome thing. Song Jisin's face was unhappy. Not far away, in the Li family's mansion, there were loud shouts, and even the sea-calming divine needle in the dark angrily made a move. The straw sandals boy did have a helper. And it was not an ordinary person. Song Jianqiang smiled. Even if the assassin's figure flashed under the Sun Hui tree, the king of Dali had no intention to stop him at all. In his field of vision, the burly figure of the old ape strode back from the west, constantly rising and falling in the town. As for whether he would trample on the houses and destroy the courtyard layout when he landed, he did not care at all. The old ape of Zhengyang Mountain seemed to have identified a punching bag. Song Jianqiang suddenly frowned, then he felt relieved, and then an instant burst of fighting spirit. Dali Song Jianqiang, a martial artist, liked three things in this life: building a capital temple, killing geniuses, and fighting immortals. In the next moment, Song Jisin's eyes widened. Unknowingly, the man above his head had already landed on Fulu Street, and collided with the burly old man in the distance, simply and almost rudely. Dalis King of Dali, the moving mountain ape. The two exchanged punches, hitting each other's chests. Song Jianqiang did not retreat, but advanced instead, taking a step forward, while the old ape took a step back. They each punched again, this time hitting each other's forehead between the eyebrows. Song Jianqiang strode forward, and this time he was the only one who punched. He stepped forward, heavily stepping on the ground, his knees slightly bent, his left hand extended forward, and his right hand clenched into a fist and pulled back. The man wore a snow-white robe, his sleeves fluttering, and the ground under his feet was full of broken bluestone. A punch went straight. The old ape could only extend a palm, blocking Song Jianqiang's fist. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be two faint cracking sounds. The old ape slid back more than 10 feet, plowing a shocking gully in the bluestone ground. Song Jianqiang gently waved his sleeve, one hand behind his back, the other holding the white jade belt at his waist, and said with a smile, "Qi Jing-chun, are you not going to stop me? Are you really going to give up? Don't, hold on a little longer." The old ape exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Song Jianqiang raised a palm, shook it, and said with a smile, "Wait until I get out of here, then we'll fight. For now, let's go about our own business." The old ape grinned, "Song Jianqiang, then you better be able to beat me when the time comes, or Dalis Southern Border Army won't have it easy." Song Jianqiang smiled, "As you wish." The old ape snorted coldly, then entered the Li family's mansion alone. The young lady was safe and sound, and could not even be considered frightened. After the old ape understood the details, he realized that it was just a clumsy trick, and after thinking for a while, he rushed to the west of the town with a sinister smile. He entered the mountains to hunt. 50. In the night, Chen Pingan fled deep into the mountains. Not long after, he ran into a bamboo forest where the soil was exceptionally soft. The straw sandals youth began to deliberately increase his footsteps. About half an hour later, when he was about to run out of the bamboo forest, the youth suddenly climbed onto a bamboo on his left and swung to another nearby bamboo. He was more like an ape than the mountain-moving ape of Zhengyang Mountain. After repeating this several times, he finally landed lightly on the ground. He squatted down and wiped his footprints with his hand. When he turned around and saw that he was about 5 to 6 feet away from the first bamboo, he continued to run. In less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the faint sound of the stream could be heard. Not only did the youth not stop running, he leaped high into the air and fell into the stream. Soon, the youth stood up. It turned out that he had landed on a huge rock. The youth, who was incomparably familiar with the landscape, tried his best to widen his eyes. Relying on his extraordinary eyesight and outstanding memory, he jumped on the rocks in the stream and fled all the way downstream. If he continued like this, he would be able to reach the Green Ox's back by the stream, then the covered bridge, and finally Master Wan's blacksmith shop. However, the youth did not get too close to the back of the Green Ox. After the stream left the mountain, he suddenly shrank to the narrowest part of the girl's waist and went ashore on the right side. Soon, he heard the girl softly shout, "Chen Pingan, over here." Chen Pingan quickly squatted down and panted. He reached out to wipe the sweat on his forehead. The girl in black whispered, "Can you really trick the old ape to go up the mountain?" The youth said bitterly, "I tried my best." It was Ning Yarrow, who had also taken a detour from the town's Fulu Street. She asked, "Are you hurt?" The straw sandals youth shook his head and said, "It's just a minor injury." The The girl had mixed feelings and said angrily, "You're lucky that the old ape didn't kill you for playing like this." Chen Pingan grinned and said, "The old bastard broke the rules once. But if you had made your move a little later, I reckon I wouldn't have succeeded." The girl was stunned and then said happily, "It really worked." "Not bad, Chen Pingan." Chen Pingan chuckled. Ning Yarrow rolled her eyes and asked, "What's next?" The straw-sandaled youth thought for a moment and said, "The general direction we agreed on will remain unchanged, but there are some details that need to be changed. The old ape is too powerful." Ning Yarrow slapped the youth's head and laughed angrily. "You just realized." Chen Pingan suddenly said, "Miss Ning, please turn around. I want to apply some herbs to my back. Also, help me keep an eye on the stream." The girl turned around and faced the upstream of the stream. Chen Pingan took off the outer robe that originally belonged to Liu Xianyang, took off the wooden porcelain armor, and took out the porcelain bottle from the Yang family's shop from a cloth pouch at his waist. He poured out some thick ointment and poured it onto his right palm. He lifted the robe with his left hand and applied it on his back with his right hand. The young man, who was able to bear the pain, couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Although the girl did not turn around, she still asked, "Is it very painful?" The young man smiled and said, "This is nothing." The young girl curled her lips. What was he trying to show off? In the westernmost house of the small town, a woman sat on the ground and cried loudly. She patted her chest with all her strength and swayed back and forth. Her thin clothes showed signs of exploding at any time. Her pair of dirty young children stood beside their mother, not knowing what to do. There was a simple and honest man squatting outside the house, sighing and moaning, his face full of helplessness. There was an inexplicable hole in the roof, and the cold air of spring had not yet faded. His body and bones could withstand it, but what about his wife and children? Not far away, the neighbors gathered together and pointed. Some said that they had also heard the noise on their roof. At first, they thought it was a stray cat causing trouble, so they didn't take it seriously. Some said that the west side of the town wasn't peaceful today. It was said that a child saw an old immortal in white floating around. His one step was as fast as a commoner's 10 steps. He could even leap onto roofs and vault over walls. They didn't know if it was the lord of the land who ran out of the ancestral hall or the mountain god who came out of the mountain. A young sword practitioner in the Wind Thunder Garden squatted alone in a corner with a solemn expression. Liu Baqiao had been chatting with Mr. Kui at the construction supervisor's office. After hearing about the disturbance in the Li family's mansion, he smelled something fishy. However, no matter how conceited this outstanding talent of the Wind Thunder Garden was, he didn't dare to provoke a mountain-moving ape. He was only considering whether he could watch the fire burn across the river. It would be even more satisfying if he had the chance to trick the old ape. As a result, Liu Baqiao made his way to the eaves of a library in a large mansion. He overlooked the town and searched for the old ape's movements. In the end, he soon discovered the abnormal activity in the Mud Bottle Alley in the west side of the town. As a result, the bold Liu Baqiao secretly kept an eye on it. In the instant that the mountain-protecting ape of Zhengyang Mountain did not hesitate to circulate its qi, Liu Baqiao had no choice but to move his natal flying sword that he had nurtured in his Mingtang acupoint after being injured. It became restless and was almost about to unsheath. This was because in this strange world, the level of cultivation was directly proportional to the strength of the heavenly way's suppression. According to Liu Baqiao's estimates, the mountain-protecting ape did not have it easy. Even if it could forcefully circulate its qi and use its tough physique or supreme ability to suppress the boiling of its qi caused by the heavenly way, the number of times it could cheat was definitely not too many. Otherwise, it would have to bear the great risk of a flood bursting through the dam. It was not impossible that its years of cultivation would be destroyed in a single day. Taking a step back, every time it took action as an immortal outside of this world, it was already a loss. In fact, it was equivalent to shortening the lifespan of a mortal. However, when Liu Baqiao saw the 2 large pits where the old ape had landed after collapsing the roof, the genius of the sword from the Wind Thunder Garden began to rejoice that he had not acted rashly. Otherwise, he would have drawn trouble to himself. Given the density of the old ape's fresh chi back then, if it had not discovered the activity in the Li family's mansion on Fulu Street and had to confirm the safety of the little girl on Jingyang Mountain, it might not have been completely certain that it could kill the cunning youth with straw sandals. However, if it were to kill Liu Baqiao, it would definitely be able to kill him. Of course, the old ape was not blind, nor was it an idiot. When his natal flying sword was about to be drawn, the mountain-guarding ape must have sensed his presence. However, Liu Baqiao had wandered around the gates of hell. Despite his lingering fear, he was not particularly fearful of the old ape's existence. Regardless of the disparity in strength between the Wind Thunder Garden and Zhengyang Mountain, it would be fine if they did not attack. Once one side chose to attack, it would be a situation where one side would fight to the death. Moreover, people with low cultivation would never kowtow and beg for mercy. This was a fact that countless lives had been sacrificed in the two sacred lands of the sword from the eastern bottle continent over the past 500 years. Moreover, it was not as if Liu Baqiao did not have a backup plan in the small town. Liu Baqiao slowly stood up. He did not go straight back to the yamen. Instead, he walked towards the small, run-down residence on the far west side. He stood outside the low, yellow mud wall and called out loudly. When the man and his wife both turned their heads to look at him, he casually threw out a golden copper coin to the weeping woman. He smiled and said, "Big sister, I beg you to stop howling. I'm so scared even from so far away." The woman took the golden copper coin and lowered her head to glance at its design. It was similar to a copper coin, but the color was different. She was a little dazed and asked softly, "Gold?" Liu Baqiao laughed and said, "No. But it's much more valuable than gold." The woman was stunned at first, then she flew into a rage and threw the golden copper coin at the young man. She stood up and scolded with her hands on her hips, "Get lost. I might believe it if it's gold, but it's more valuable than gold. Do you think I haven't seen the world? I'm also someone who hasn't seen silver with my own hands. You little bastard who hasn't even grown hair yet. You don't even care about the little loach in your pants. How dare you come to my place and pretend to be a master? My man is not dead yet." Speaking of this, the woman became even angrier. She walked over quickly. Her thick waist was not much thinner than a bucket, but she could still twist it in a different way. She kicked the man who was squatting on the ground without saying a word, causing him to fall to the ground. The man did not even dare to talk back, let alone fight back. He crawled away and then continued squatting, his eyes filled with resentment. The woman pointed at her man and scolded, "Useless coward, you're no different from being dead. You only know how to play dead when something happens. You only know how to wander around all day, catching fish and catching snakes. You're no different from a child wearing diapers. You're worse than your son. At least Xiao Huai knows how to steal, pick up some things to go home. You're a father. Why aren't you willing to work as a clerk in the Yang family's shop? Are you so rich that you have to compete with silver? You don't even know how to do proper work all year round." Speaking of this, the woman with a bosom worthy of the word spectacular suddenly smiled. "If it weren't for the fact that you can still torment people at night, I'd be willing to spend my days with you." The neighbors who were watching the show burst into laughter. There were also young and strong men who whistled and said dirty words. The woman finally pointed her spear at the culprit again and roared, "Why aren't you getting lost? You haven't weaned yet, have you?" Liu Baqiao had never seen such rustic behavior. Not only did he not find it despicable, but he also found it quite interesting. He watched the show with relish. Even though he was badly scolded by the woman, he did not get angry but laughed instead. Every time he quarreled in the Wind and Thunder Garden, he would feel a kind of loneliness. He felt that he had good martial arts skills but had no equal opponent. He never thought that he would finally have a place to use his skills today. He became excited and said with a cheeky smile, "So what if I haven't weaned? Big sister, can you help me?" The woman raised her eyebrows and sneered, "I'm afraid that I'll accidentally suffocate you to death. You can go to Granny Ma in Apricot Blossom Lane. You can eat until you're full." Suddenly, laughter shook the sky. Although Liu Baqiao did not know who Granny Ma was, from the reaction of the audience around him, he knew that he had been defeated miserably. The young sword cultivator gave a thumbs up and said with a bright smile, "Big sister, you win." Then he clamped the gold fine copper coin with 2 fingers and shook it. "You really don't want it?" The woman was obviously hesitant and suspicious. At this moment, someone in the distance helplessly shouted, "Barqiao, Mr. Kui wants you to go back quickly." Liu Barqiao heard the voice and turned his head. It was Chen Songfeng, a disciple of the Chen family in the Dragon Tail Commandery. Beside him stood a tall and cold woman. She was empty-handed and did not carry any weapons. Her appearance was not outstanding, but her figure was indescribable. Her pair of long legs was very much to Liu Barqiao's liking. She was Chen Songfeng's distant relative. As for how distant, Chen Songfeng had never taken the initiative to mention it. The woman had always called Chen Songfeng by his name. Along the way, the 3 of them usually got along. Liu Barqiao did not feel that the woman was arrogant, just that her temperament was naturally cold. Since Kui Minghuang had spoken, Liu Barqiao did not dare to stay any longer. He followed the 2 to Fulu Street. But when he left, he subconsciously glanced at the middle-aged man with a frown. A sloppy man mixed in the crowd hesitated for a moment. After the neighbors dispersed, he walked alone to the courtyard. The woman was about to bring her son and daughter to live with her parents. She was really unwilling. Her parents were all snobbish and looked down on the man she had chosen. Therefore, in these years, except for festivals, they rarely interacted with each other. But this kind of unexpected misfortune, the woman had no choice. She wanted to be more unyielding and bring her son and daughter to live in an inn for a few days. She wanted to be the daughter-in-law of a rich man. But unfortunately, she was embarrassingly short of money. She was so poor that she could not even make a sound. She could only thicken her skin and return to her parents' home to be looked down upon. So, the more the woman thought about it, the angrier she became. Before she left, she fiercely pinched her husband's waist until his entire face was crooked. The 2 children were used to this scene. Not only were they not worried about their parents quarreling, they were even secretly laughing. The woman's eyes were sharp. She saw the sloppy man hiding by the door sneakily and immediately scolded, "Surnamed Zheng, are you here to steal my clothes again? Are you a dog? Rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. No matter how much I don't want to admit it, I still have 8 lifetimes of bad luck. I'm your sister-in-law. How can you bear to steal it?" The sloppy man wanted to cry but had no tears. He even had the heart to die. "Sister-in-law, I swear to heaven and earth. I just forgot to buy candy for your family's Xiao Huai," so he deliberately said that. "Sister-in-law, how can you really believe it?" The little boy had an innocent face. Of course, the woman trusted her child more. She raised her hand and was about to slap the man. The latter quickly shrank his neck and ran to the side. He shouted to the man squatting on the ground, "Senior brother, why don't you persuade sister-in-law?" The man said in a low muffled voice, "I don't dare to persuade her." The sloppy man sighed. This world can't let honest people survive. The woman held the children in each hand and walked to the courtyard door. Suddenly, she turned her head and threw a coquettish look. She smiled and said, "Surnamed Zheng, bring more money next time. Sister-in-law will sell it to you. I'll only charge you 50 copper coins each. How about it?" The sloppy man's eyes lit up. He said timidly, "Isn't it a little expensive? The new clothes from the shop in Apricot Blossom Lane, the fabric is the best, but it's only this price." The woman changed her face faster than flipping a book. She scolded, "You really dare to have such bad thoughts? Go to hell, you deserve to be a bachelor for life. Your life is worthless. If you die at the East Gate one day, no one will collect your corpse." After the woman and the children left, the sloppy man jumped back lightly and sat on the wall of the courtyard. He said angrily, "Senior brother, I don't want to criticize you, but you're really blind. That's why you chose such a shrewish woman as your wife." It turned out that this sloppy man was the gatekeeper of the east gate of the town. His surname was Zhang, and he was a bachelor. The honest man who was still squatting on the ground in the courtyard jumped out. "I'm happy." The gatekeeper of the town who was in charge of collecting money from outsiders was silent for a moment. He said, "Master asked you to bear with it for the time being. Don't fight with others. The gatekeeper looked up and glanced at the pitiful roof. He suddenly laughed. Master also said that if you really can't bear it, you can find your wife to vent your anger. Anyway, sister-in-law isn't afraid of you tormenting her. She likes this kind of attitude. The man who couldn't even beat a fart with 10 sticks raised his head and looked at the sloppy man on the low wall. The latter quickly changed his words. Okay. I, Zheng Dafeng, said it. Master didn't say such things. The honest man stood up. He had a short stature and bronze skin. The muscles on his arms were bulging, causing his sleeves to be stretched. He was also a little hunchbacked. He said to the gatekeeper in a bad mood, "If master is willing to say more than 10 words to you, I'll take your surname." The gatekeeper repeated his master's words in his heart. He then counted with his fingers. It really wasn't more than 10 words. The sloppy man first cursed. Then, he was very discouraged and sad. He actually revealed his true feelings for the first time, so he looked especially pitiful. The hunchbacked man asked, "Is there anything else?" The gatekeeper nodded. "Master asked you to deal with that person." The hunchbacked man frowned. He habitually squatted down and faced the house. He said in a muffled voice, "Why should I?" The gatekeeper, Zheng Dafeng, rolled his eyes. "It's master's orders. It's up to you." The man thought for a moment. "You can leave. Next time, if I see you stealing sister-in-law's things, I'll break your 3 legs. The sloppy man, Zheng Dafeng, was furious. "Leah, explain it to me. Who stole your wife's clothes? How could you believe such nonsense? Is your brain flooded with water?" The man turned his head and looked at his angry junior brother. His face darkened and he remained silent. Zheng Dafeng was like a resentful girl who had been wronged. He said in grief and indignation, "I won't dare to do it again. Is that okay?" The gatekeeper stood up and tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. Like a locust tree leaf, he floated into the street. When he was far away, he dared to curse, "Leah, I'm going to find sister-in-law to buy her underwear." The sloppy man ran faster than a dog as he said those harsh words. However, the honest man had no intention of getting up. He spat out a word. "Coward." The 3 of them returned to the Yamen. The Confucian gentleman from Lakeview Academy, Kui Ming Huang, had been waiting in the main hall for a long time. When he saw the unfamiliar woman, Kui Ming Huang stood up and nodded in greeting. The woman nodded back. Her expression was still cold. In Liu Baqiao's private words, it was as if the whole world owed her a lot of money. After the 3 of them sat down, Kui Ming Huang smiled at Liu Baqiao. "It's good that you didn't make a move. Otherwise, you would have caused a big mess. You didn't see it. Just now, our supervising officer Song and that Zhengyang Mountain's mountain guardian ape clashed 3 times on Fulu Street. It caused quite a commotion. To be honest, no matter what kind of rare opportunity you encounter, I advise you not to make a move. Don't think that you can take advantage of it." Liu Baqiao asked curiously, "Don't tell me that old bastard defeated Song Jianqiang with 3 punches? Song Jianqiang is so useless. Didn't they say that he's already at the threshold of the 10th realm? He's only half a step away from that realm." Kui Ming Huang said helplessly, "In any case, we're staying at Officer Song's place. Can't you be a little more polite?" Chen Songfeng sighed. "It's Officer Song who has the upper hand. Even if it had nothing to do with the vassal of Dali, as long as one was a cultivator, it was impossible not to be fascinated by such a feat after hearing about it. A pure martial artist who only used his physical body to fight a mountain-moving ape to the end. Most importantly, this person even had the upper hand." The woman sat at the side with her eyes closed. Her hands were naturally placed on her knees. When she heard this, her fingers moved slightly. She was also hurriedly found by Chen Songfeng. Originally, she planned to wander around the small town. The reason why she didn't insist and followed Chen Songfeng to find Liu Baqiao before returning to the Yamen was because she did as the Romans did. As for whether Chen Songfeng could gain some benefits from the old locust tree and obtain a few ancestral shade locust tree leaves, the woman with the same surname Chen didn't care. However, when Chen Songfeng found her, she could still clearly feel the young man's deliberately suppressed excitement. It was most likely due to his bountiful harvest. The number of locust tree leaves that fell exceeded the expectations of Dragon Tail County's Chen clan's patriarch. Liu Baqiao suddenly held his stomach and laughed. That old bastard suffered a huge setback this time. How delightful. He was actually led by the nose through half of the small town by an ordinary youth. Haha, this is the biggest joke in the world. It's enough for me to talk about in the Wind Thunder Garden for 10 years. When the time comes, with the temperament of those country bumpkins from Zhengyang Mountain, they'll definitely jump out and say that the Wind Thunder Garden is slandering them. If you have the ability, show me the evidence. I'll show you the evidence. If it weren't for the small town's prohibition of spells and the price of breaking the rules is too high, I'd copy this scene into the voice and appearance mirror even if I die. Kui Minghuang's expression suddenly changed slightly. He shouted at Liu Baqiao, "Baqiao." The woman opened her eyes almost at the same time. Liu Baqiao was just about to ask what was going on, but he suddenly shut his mouth. Soon, a white-robed man slowly walked in. After crossing the threshold, he smiled at Liu Baqiao and asked, "What's so funny? It's better to have fun together than to have fun alone. Why don't you let me have some fun too?" Kui Minghuang had already stood up and was about to speak. He meant to give the main seat to this Dali vassal king. Song Jianqiang smiled and shook his head at this scholar from Lakeview Academy, indicating that there was no need for such complicated formalities. He casually pulled a chair and sat beside Liu Baqiao, facing Chen Songfeng and the woman on his left and right. Although Liu Baqiao gave the impression that he was a mischievous person, at such a close distance, he was facing a martial artist who was very likely to reach the 10th realm of the legendary realm. This guy was notorious. Putting aside the king-building temple incident, the fact that he had a hobby of killing geniuses was really creepy. Therefore, although Liu Baqiao kept calling him Song Jianqiang when the Dali vassal king was not here, he was very guilty at this moment. Fortunately, the young sword practitioner did not care much about his face. He smiled apologetically and said, "Great Master Song, I was just talking about the battle between you and the old bastard of Zhengyang Mountain. It was really shocking. Your Highness, your fist was like a dragon. If you had not shown mercy, that mountain guardian ape would have died on the spot on Fulu Street. Lord Song's martial arts and martial virtues are really beyond my reach." Song Jianqiang smiled and did not speak. Liu Baqiao's forehead and back were soaked in cold sweat. Finally, he could not say a word and resentfully shut his mouth completely. Song Jianqiang suddenly turned to look at the woman opposite him. His eyes were playful and full of interest. He asked, "Are you also a disciple of the Chen family of Dragon Tail Commandery?" The woman shook her head and said slowly, "No." Song Jianqiang said, "Oh," thoughtfully. The atmosphere was awkward. Until Song Jisin appeared at the door. Seeing that there were no chairs in the house, the young man casually stood on the threshold and looked at the people in the house. Song Jianqiang did not take it to heart. He smiled at Liu Baqiao and said, "Actually, you're one of the benefactors of the young man's survival." The mountain-moving ape had not assumed that the young man's provocation was instigated by someone. In this small town, those who dared to set a trap for Zhengyang Mountain were not fools. They were all people who were good at planning and then acting. Therefore, the old ape thought that the oriole behind the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind the mantis stalking the cicada, must have a high status and powerful skills. That was why the old ape, who did not want to reveal any flaws, was in such a sorry state in Mud Bottle Alley. Therefore, the old ape only loosened his hands and punched the young man in straw sandals in the back after making sure that there were no assassins lurking around the house on the west side of the town. Liu Baqiao laughed dryly and said, "Although that's the truth, I don't want to be your benefactor." Song Jianqiang dismissed it with a smile. The woman turned and glanced at the handsome young man sitting on the threshold. The young man smiled at her. The woman turned back with an expressionless face. The young man curled his lips and began to admire her long legs openly. She was about 25 or 26 years old. She was not bad looking, but the young man thought that she was quite tasteful. The woman turned back with a cold gaze and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you want to die?" Song Jisin pointed at himself with an extremely superficial and innocent expression. He looked like he deserved a beating. Me? The young man then pointed at Song Jankyung, the king of Dali. You'll have to ask him first. The woman was about to stand up. Song Jankyung immediately narrowed his eyes. In the main hall, a majestic pressure slammed down on everyone's heads like a storm. There was nowhere to hide. Everyone's skin felt like it was being pricked by needles. Only Song Jisin, who was at the door, did not feel anything. Chen Songfeng spoke with difficulty, but his tone was not weak. Your Highness, this lady is not from Eastern Bottle Continent, so I hope your Highness will be careful. The woman smiled and stood up. You dare to kill me? Aren't you afraid that Dali will be destroyed? Kui Ming Huang was about to stop her. The woman flew backward. The chair behind her turned into dust in the air. The woman's tall body was completely embedded in the wall, almost like an object embedded in the wall. Song Jankyung stood under the wall mysteriously with his hands behind his back. He looked up slightly at the woman who was bleeding from her 7 orifices and smiled. Little girl, do you think that your father or ancestor is very powerful, so you're qualified to show off in front of this king? What's that word again? The king turned to look at his nephew with a smile. The young man smiled and said, Jew, nonsense. Song Jankyung smiled and turned to look at the woman. Although the latter's face was full of pain, her eyes were firm and did not show the slightest sign of weakness. Song Jankyung said, in your next life, don't meet this king again. Chen Songfeng's liver and gallbladder were torn apart. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was in an extremely complicated mood. He was about to speak with great anger and great fear. He was about to speak, but Kui Ming Huang had already taken a step forward and bowed to apologize. He lowered his head and said sincerely, Your Highness, can you give me face and not lower yourself to her level? Song Jankyung's mouth twitched, full of sarcasm. The woman who was looking at the king of Dali suddenly closed her eyes as if she had accepted her fate. At this moment, the young man on the other side of the threshold laughed and said, Uncle, forget it. If word gets out that you bullied a woman, it will damage your reputation. Song Jankyung's figure paused slightly. It was so subtle that even Kui Ming Huang and Liu Baqiao only felt that the killing god did not move at all. Song Jankyung tilted his head, stretched out 2 fingers, and flicked casually. It was as if he was brushing the dust off his shoulder. Liu Baqiao, the number 1 of the younger generation in the Wind Thunder Garden, was dumbfounded. Kui Ming Huang was relieved. Chen Songfeng felt as if he had fallen into the clouds. Song Jankyung smiled at Liu Baqiao and said, Boy, not bad. I think highly of you. The woman opened her eyes and pulled herself out of the wall. After landing, her figure swayed and she said to the back of the man, Chen will remember today's lesson. Song Jankyung ignored her and said to Liu Baqiao, after leaving the town, go to the capital of Dali and find me. I have something for you. It depends on whether you can carry it or not. Liu Baqiao blurted out, Talisman sword. Cultivators all knew that the talisman sword was one of the main magic artifacts of Taoism. But if a sword could be directly crowned with the name talisman sword and known by the world, one could imagine how amazing this sword would be. Song Jankyung and Song Jisin walked out of the courtyard. The man smiled and said, Have you vented the anger in your chest? Song Jisin nodded and said, More or less. Regarding the incident with Chen Pinggan, this guy even tricked his own nephew. Of course, Song Jisin was full of resentment. Song Jisin suddenly frowned and asked, That woman seems to have a strong background. Uncle, aren't you afraid that if you beat the young one, you'll provoke the big one, and if you beat the big one, you'll provoke the old fart? If the county records are not lying, then I know how powerful those old bastards are. When the time comes, will Dali really be fine? The man calmed the young man with 1 sentence. You've underestimated Song Jankyung. In the main hall, Kui Ming Huang sat back in his seat without showing any emotion. Liu Baqiao slumped against the back of the chair and said with lingering fear, Oh my, is the difference between the 7th and 8th realms so big? There was a 7th and 8th realms martial artist in the Wind Thunder Garden, and they all had a good relationship with Liu Baqiao. Kui Ming Huang shook his head and said, In Go, even 9th realms are divided into strong and weak. Besides, Song Jianqiang is the strongest ninth realm player. Then, Kui Minghuang looked at the woman called Chen Duan and asked with concern, "Miss Chen, are you all right?" The woman was also a ruthless person. Although her face was pale, she still smiled calmly and said, "I'm fine." Chen Songfeng seemed to be even more terrified than the distant relative of this person. Kui Minghuang sighed inwardly. It would be difficult for the Dragon Tail County's Chen clan to stand out in the upcoming chaos. Liu Baqiao clicked his tongue and said, "You can bounce my flying sword back to my acupuncture point with a flick of your finger without hurting my spirit at all. That's unbelievable." Kui Minghuang joked, "Now you know that there's always someone better than you, right?" Liu Baqiao laughed evilly and said, "Someone better than you? Mr. Kui, you're not a gentleman at all." Kui Minghuang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to this idiot. Liu Baqiao thought for a moment and comforted the woman with the strange name. He didn't want her to take things too hard and go looking for trouble with Song Jianqiang. If that happened, everyone in the room would have to bear the consequences. "Big Sister Chen, although I'm saying this to boost other people's morale and diminish my own, it's not shameful to lower your head and take a step back when you meet Song Jianqiang." Chen Songfeng wanted to say something but stopped. However, the woman grunted and said indifferently, "Song Jianqiang is indeed qualified. I'm not unconvinced, I'm just unwilling to accept it." Liu Baqiao said heartlessly, "Actually, it doesn't matter if you're unwilling to accept it. Look at me, I'm so happy right now. When I return to the Wind and Thunder Garden, I'll have another 10 years to brag about. I actually fought Dali Song Jianqiang. Even if it was only one move, I, Liu Baqiao, came out unscathed in the end. Of course, if I can really get that Dallas talisman sword, I'll brag about it for 100 years. The woman's thoughts turned elsewhere. She couldn't help but think of the young man sitting on the doorstep. The young man who could stop Song Jianqiang from killing people with just one sentence. After the old shopkeeper of the Yang family's shop returned to the town, he went straight to the courtyard behind his shop. It was neither big nor small, just big enough for the 3 workers in the shop to live in. The shopkeeper pushed open the door to the main room in the backyard and saw an old man sitting on a chair, fiddling with his old tobacco pipe. After the shopkeeper closed the door, he called Old Man Yang. The old man quickly put down the old bamboo pipe and poured a cup of tea. He smiled and asked, "Shopkeeper, is there someone in a hurry to use medicine? Do you need me to go up the mountain in the dark?" The old shopkeeper looked at the old man who looked to be about the same age as him and shook his head. He picked up the teacup and sighed, "Today, I've seen a patient for Master Wan. It's a young man surnamed Liu. He was beaten half to death by a foreigner. I'm feeling uneasy, so I thought I'd come to your shop to sit and relax." Old Man Yang, whose face was full of wrinkles like the bark of an old locust tree, smiled and said, "Shopkeeper, just sit down. We're not outsiders." The shopkeeper suddenly remembered something. "By the way, Old Man Yang, you helped a child many years ago. The poor child in Mud Bottle Alley who helped his mother get medicine at a young age. Is his name Chen Pinggan?" Old Man Yang was a little surprised and nodded. "Yes, that child's mother finally passed away. If I remember correctly, she didn't survive that winter. After that, I saw the child a few times, but not many times. I couldn't stand it at that time, so I gave the child a worthless prescription." "What happened? Was the child injured by someone?" The shopkeeper took a sip of tea and smiled bitterly. "Didn't I just say that the young man's surname is Liu? Old Man Yang, you really have a bad memory." Old Man Yang laughed and didn't care. The old shopkeeper asked cautiously, "Old Yang, should we do something for our shop?" Old Man Yang picked up the old tobacco pipe made of small Nanju bamboo and shook it. "Shopkeeper, you don't need to do anything." The shopkeeper seemed to have eaten a calming pill and nodded. That's good, that's good. Old Man Yang, I'll leave first. You do what you need to do." Old Man Yang was about to stand up and send him off, but the shopkeeper quickly persuaded him, "No need to send me off." After the shopkeeper walked down the stairs, he looked back and saw Old Man Yang was about to close the door. After looking at each other, Old Man Yang grinned and the shopkeeper quickly turned around and left. When the shopkeeper took over the shop in his middle age, His father, who was dying on the bed, said some strange words. If the shop encounters a big problem, find Old Man Yang and do as he says. This sentence seems to have been passed down from your grandfather's grandfather. In the future, when you pass down the shop to the next generation, don't forget to say this. You must not forget. At that time, the old shopkeeper nodded vigorously in agreement. Only then did the old man swallow his last breath and pass away peacefully with his eyes closed. The night gradually deepened. Old Man Yang lit an oil lamp. As he smoked, the old man thought of some things that happened in the past. They were all trivial matters that no one would care about. An ancestral house that had been passed down from generation to generation was neatly tidied up. It didn't look like a family in Clay Bottle Alley. An honest man squatted in front of the courtyard. Looking at a delicate and pretty child, he asked with a smile, "Son, after the new year, are you an adult?" The child raised his hand and said in a lively and childish voice, "Father, I'm 5 years old, so I'm an adult." The man smiled and felt a little sad. "Then when father is not here, mother will be handed over to you to take care of. Can you do it?" The child immediately straightened his back. "Yes." The man smiled and stretched out a big hand full of calluses. "Pinky promise." The child quickly stretched out his small white hand and happily said, "Pinky promise, I won't change it for 100 years. The father and son Pinky hooked their pinky fingers and their thumbs were tightly pressed together. After the man let go, he slowly stood up and turned his head to look at the graceful figure who was busy in the main room. Then, he suddenly strode away. The child behind him shouted, "Father, Tanghulu is delicious." The man's lips trembled. He turned his head and squeezed out a smile. "I know." In the end, the child was sensible. He blinked his eyes. "The small ones are more delicious." The man quickly turned his head and didn't dare to look at his son again. He continued to walk and murmured, "Son, father is leaving." In the Yang family's shop, a child who came to buy medicine every few days was pushed out of the shop by an impatient shop assistant. The young shop assistant scolded, "How many times have I told you? These few pieces of silver can't even buy the dregs of medicine. How can you be so annoying and block the way for half a day? We are a medicine shop. We are doing business, not a temple. There is no bodhisattva for you to worship. If it weren't for your young age, I would have hit you. Get out, get out." The child clenched the shriveled money bag tightly. He wanted to cry, but he insisted on not crying out loud. He still repeated the same words over and over again, "My mother is still waiting for me to boil the medicine. It has been a long time. My family really has no money, but my mother is really sick." The young shop assistant casually picked up a broom and pretended to hit the child. The child standing outside the door was so scared that he squatted down and covered his head with both hands. His left hand still didn't forget to hold the money bag tightly. After a long time, the child raised his head and found a stern-faced old man standing there, looking at him. The young shop assistant had resentfully put down the broom and busied himself with the matter at hand. The old man stretched out a hand. "Give money when you buy things. It is a matter of course for businessmen to make money. As for how much you earn, it depends on your conscience. But there is absolutely no reason to lose money. So give me the money bag. I will accept those few pieces of silver. Today, I will give you the medicine needed for your mother's treatment on credit. But you have to pay back the money later. You are not allowed to owe the shop a single cent, little guy. Do you understand?" The child blinked his eyes. He was confused, but he still handed over the money bag. In the end, the old man leaned on the counter with some effort. Then, he looked at the child whose head was almost invisible and asked, "Do you know how to boil the medicine?" The child pecked at the rice. "I know." The old man frowned. "You really know?" This time, the child only dared to gently nod. The young shop assistant laughed in the distance. "Our master Liu went to Mud Bottle Alley at that time. After treating his mother, he taught the child once. Later, he was worried and personally watched the child suffer. It's strange. A big kid unexpectedly didn't make any mistakes. Master Liu said it himself, so it should be true." The old man waved to the child, "Go." The child happily carried a large bag of medicine wrapped in butter paper and quickly ran back to Mud Bottle Alley. His mother was lying on the wooden bed. After the child tiptoed into the house, he found that his mother was still sleeping. He touched her forehead and found that it was not hot. He was relieved. Then, the child quietly moved one of his mother's hands back to the quilt. The child went to the kitchen outside the house and began to boil the medicine in a clay pot. Taking advantage of the time, he began to cook. The child needed to step on a small stool. The child vigorously turned the spatula and choked on the hot water. He didn't forget to nag, "It must be delicious, it must be, otherwise, mother will lose her appetite again." A child who was only 5 years old carried a basket almost larger than himself and walked to the mountain outside the town. This was the child's second time entering the mountain. The first time, old Yang of the Yang family's shop took care of the child's weak leg strength, so he walked very slowly. In addition, the old man only taught the child to pick a few kinds of herbs, and the basket was also carried by the old man, so it was actually easy to enter and leave the mountain. Today, it was different. The child carried the basket under the hot sun, and there was a burst of burning pain on his back. The child walked while crying. He gritted his teeth and walked forward. That time, the child returned to the Yang family's shop after dark. There was only a thin layer of medicine in the basket. Old Yang was furious. The child cried and said that his mother was the only one at home. He was afraid that his mother would be hungry. Otherwise, there would be more medicine. He said that he could get up early tomorrow and enter the mountain. The old man was silent. He turned and left, only saying that he would give him another chance. Less than 2 months later, the child's hands and feet were full of calluses. One day, a sudden rainstorm made the child, who had forgotten the time while picking herbs in the mountain, separated on the other side of the stream. Looking at the raging flood, the child wailed in the heavy rain. In the end, the child couldn't bear it anymore and planned to jump into the stream. At that time, old Yang suddenly appeared on the other side, stepped across the stream, and carried the child back. The raindrops the size of soybeans fell on the child, but he was smiling happily on the way down the mountain. After leaving the mountain, the old man said, "Little Ping'an, help me make a pipe, and I'll teach you how to climb the mountain without getting tired." The child reached out to wipe the rain and grinned, "Okay." The child jumped back to Clay Bottle Lane. Today, he picked a very rare and precious herb, so the Yang family's shop gave his mother more medicine. The child, who hadn't eaten for a day, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach. At that moment, the child knew that he had eaten something wrong on the mountain. The pain started from his stomach, to his hands and feet, and finally to his head. The child first carefully squatted down, took off the basket, and then took a deep breath, trying to suppress the pain. But there was a burst of burning and a burst of cold. In the end, the child could only roll in the alley in pain. From beginning to end, the child didn't dare to cry out. No matter how his head hit the wall of the alley, the child didn't cry out in the end. It was too close to home. The child was afraid that his mother, who was lying in bed, would be worried. During that process, the child, who was unconscious, only felt the beating of his heart, like the sound of a drum, rumbling in his ears. In Apricot Blossom Lane, a child squatted not far from the Tanghulu stall. Every time, he squatted for a while, but the stall owner remembered that dark little face. Finally, one time, the man who sold Tanghulu took off a Tanghulu and smiled, "Here you go, free of charge." The child quickly got up, shook his head, smiled shyly, and ran away. After that, the child's figure was never seen again. That winter, the woman on the sickbed was already as thin as a match. Naturally, her face was withered and ugly. The child, who had just returned from praying at the dilapidated statue, went to Apricot Blossom Lane to fetch water from the iron lock well. He came to the bedside and sat on a small stool. Seeing that his mother was awake, he softly asked, "Mother, are you better?" The woman smiled with difficulty, "Much better. It doesn't hurt at all." The child was overjoyed, "Mother, praying to the bodhisattvas is useful." The woman nodded and shakily stretched out a hand. The child quickly held his mother's hand. The woman turned her body to the side in extreme pain and stared at her child's face. The woman, who had been tortured by illness, suddenly brimmed with happiness. She murmured, "How can there be such a good child in the world, and how can he be my son?" In the winter of that year, the woman didn't make it through the end of the year. She didn't wait for her son to put up the spring festival couplets and the door god, and died. Before she closed her eyes, it just happened to snow in the small town. She let her son go out to see the snow. The woman listened to her son's footsteps running out of the house. She closed her eyes and piously murmured, fragmented peace, my little Pingan, years of peace, years of peace, years of peace, years of peace, years of peace." From that day on, Chen Pingan became an orphan. It's just that he turned from a child to a teenager. 51. After he returned to Fulu town, he had a brief sparring session with the Prince of Li, Song Changjing. The old ape of Zhengyang Mountain did not stay in the Li residence for too long. He flew out of the town and stopped for a moment at the place where the young man with straw sandals entered the mountain. Then, he returned to the place where he punched and carefully observed the depth of the young man's footprints on the ground. Apart from that, the old ape also saw a series of faint footprints of an adult. It guessed that they were probably left by the young sword cultivator from the Wind Thunder Garden. When it punched the young man from Clay Bottle Alley, the young man was clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. There was an instant of sword chi leaking out. Although it was fleeting and well hidden, the old ape was a veteran of hundreds of battles. It had also cultivated for 1,000 years on Mount Shenyang where sword chi could break bottles. It was all too familiar with sword chi and sword intent. The guardian ape of Mount Shenyang had lived for too long, so it was too knowledgeable. It had seen sword immortals who were adept at nurturing high-tier flying swords. Among them, there were dozens of miniature flying swords that were as tiny as hair. It had also seen life-bound flying swords as large as mountains that could cut rivers in half with a single slash. The old ape pondered for a while before continuing forward. After entering the mountain, it was overgrown with weeds and then a bamboo forest. Most of the ground was covered with dried leaves from last autumn and winter. However, since it was the closest to the town, the bamboo forest did not appear barren and messy. Following the imperceptible footprints, the old ape discovered that it was about to leave the bamboo forest. The old ape did not walk out of the bamboo forest directly. Instead, it looked around and did not see the young man's footprints. It looked up and saw no obvious footprints on the bamboos around it. However, the old ape still did not pursue the young man up the mountain. Instead, it rose from the ground and stepped on the top of a thick bamboo. It slightly increased its strength and leaned its body toward the mountain. The bamboo bent and was about to collapse when the old ape suddenly dispersed its aura. Its burly body was as light as a feather. Without the heavy burden, the bamboo immediately rebounded and straightened. The old man stood on the top of the bamboo like a deity riding the wind. His body swayed slightly with the bamboo. After looking around and looking down, the old ape finally discovered some clues. The corners of its mouth twitched and it looked to its left. After listening carefully, it vaguely heard the sound of flowing water. The old macaque sneered. "You're as cunning as ever." The old macaque stepped on the bamboos and ran toward the stream on its left. It did not know how many bamboos were broken along the way, but when it arrived at the stream, the old macaque was unsure whether the young man with straw shoes would follow the stream into the deep forest or escape downstream. The old ape squatted by the stream and frowned. It was rather resentful. If they were in the outside world, as long as there was a mountain with a bit of spiritual energy, the old ape would be able to forcefully summon the earth god, who had lost his backing, and find out where the young man went after asking. This was also one of the original supernatural powers of the mountain-moving ape. Otherwise, no matter how powerful and famous other cultivators were, they would never be able to easily order around the gods of a region. The path to the Great Tao was different. It was just like how the Minister of War could not order a small minister counselor of the Ministry of Revenue to do this and that. The most important thing was that the Minister of War and the Minister Counselor were not in the imperial court of a country. The old macaque fell into deep thought as it listened to the stream. Logically speaking, the young man had probably honed his skills and stamina since he was young. He might have even studied shallow breathing techniques, which gave him an extraordinary physique. His body was light, his bones were hard, and his chi and blood were strong, which allowed him to play cat and mouse games with the old macaque on the roof of the alley. If that was the case, it made sense for him to hide in the depths of the dense forest where he was familiar with the path. If he was a pure young man, he only wanted to seek revenge because of his hot-bloodedness. After tasting the severity of the situation, he gradually cooled down and naturally became fearful. It was reasonable for him to run to the blacksmith's shop in the south to seek protection from Master Wan. The former would only take time, whereas the latter would not only consume energy, but it would also consume the incense on Zhengyang Mountain. The old macaque followed its heart and blurted out, "This young man must die." After saying that, the old macaque no longer had any doubts. It chose to pursue the young man downstream. To the south of the town, there was a winding yellow mud path. On both sides of the path were the paddy fields of the townspeople. Halfway through the path, there was a small dilapidated temple with white walls and black tiles. Although it was called a temple, it was actually a place for the townspeople to rest. Especially during the busy farming season, hot summer, or stormy weather, it made a world of difference whether there was a shelter or not. At this moment, Chen Pinggan and Ning Yarrow were resting here. Ning Yarrow was born with an integrated sword heart, so it was easy for her to see at night. She easily discovered that the dilapidated walls were filled with young children's charcoal scribbles. Most of them were names. Most of the lower parts were mottled, distorted, or overlapped. Only on the higher parts were some names that were clearly visible. Song Jisin, Jiqiu, Zhao Yarrow, Xiesha, Kaoshi. It was a long string of names. She guessed that they were written while riding on the neck or standing on the shoulders of their friends. Ning Yarrow even saw the names of Liu Xianyang, Chen Pinggan, and Jiyu Kan. They were clustered in the highest part of the upper left corner, which made them seem rather out of place. Ning Yarrow retracted her gaze and asked, "Anyway, we've done the first step. We've forced the old macaque to breathe for the first time. Are you really going to the town to retrieve the wooden bow? Isn't it too risky? What if the old macaque is very cautious and doesn't go up the mountain to find trouble with you? Wouldn't you be like a lamb in a tiger's den?" The straw sandals teenager had been silently exhaling. The length of his breaths was not fixed. Everything depended on his feelings. He pursued the most comfortable state. After hearing Ning Yarrow's words, he said with a determined look, "There's no other way. We have to retrieve the wooden bow. Otherwise, all our previous efforts will be in vain. Besides, I shot an arrow at the old macaque's head in the mud bottle alley. It's just as Miss Ning said. Even at such a close distance, as long as the arrow doesn't hit the old macaque's eyes, the damage is negligible." Ning Yarrow was a little annoyed. "I've already said that your little tricks won't work. You didn't believe me before and didn't listen to my advice. Fine, I'll let you be. But since you believe me now, you should follow my method, right?" In fact, regarding how to deal with the old macaque of Xingyang Mountain, the young man and the young woman discussed this matter on the covered bridge at first. Chen Pinggan only asked the young woman to wait for him to go back to the town to find the three people. However, the young man suddenly changed his mind and caught up with Ning Yarrow before she reached the stairs at the north end of the covered bridge. After that, the two of them had a huge disagreement. The young woman who carried both a saber and a sword was very firm in the beginning. Chen Pinggan was not a cultivator and did not even know the fist style. He should just watch from the side. At most, he would help her to kill the old macaque to avenge Liu Xianyang and vent the hatred in her heart. However, when Chen Pinggan asked her how to kill the old macaque, Ning Yarrow was unwilling to tell him. She only said that she had a trump card that allowed her to travel the world alone. How could she not have a trump card that had been passed down in her family? Chen Pinggan did not agree. That was why Chen Pinggan went to find her 3 times. Chen Pinggan stood up and stretched his waist. With almost no obstruction, he stood up and said, "I've rested enough." Ning Yarrow was surprised. The things in the young family's shop are so useful. Chen Pinggan's eyes dimmed for a moment, but he quickly nodded and said with a smile, "Very useful." Ning Yarrow asked, "Will the old macaque see through your escape route?" Chen Pinggan thought for a moment and answered cautiously, "Maybe." Ning Yarrow drew 2 circles and a straight line on the ground with her scabbard. She asked, "This is the route between the small temple and the Lee's house on Fulu Street. Where did you hide your wooden bow?" Chen Pingan squatted down and drew a circle. "It's close to the east. It's almost here. It's not too far from Mud Bottle Alley." Ning Yarrow nodded. "Okay. Even if the old macaque comes directly to the small temple, I'll delay him and buy you enough time." Chen Pingan drew a small circle in the middle of the line with his finger. "If it's really the worst-case scenario, Miss Ning, can you lure him here? It's the place where I entered the mountain. It won't take long for me to get the wooden bow and rush over." The girl in a dark green robe leaned on the ground with her scabbard. She said proudly, "Maybe I'll bring the old macaque's head to your place." Chen Pingan shook his head. "Don't try to be brave. Be careful." Ning Yarrow wanted to hit his head with her scabbard. Who was the one trying to be brave? She glared at him. "Hey. The person standing in front of you is me, Ning Yarrow, the future #1 sword immortal in the world." "Okay." The young man stood up and looked down at the 2 cloth bags on his waist, just in case. He tightened them again and looked up with a smile. I know. So, don't die in a small place like this. Otherwise, it'll be a loss. When you become a big shot in the future, as a friend, I'll be able to bask in your glory." Ning Yarrow sighed. "Chen Pingan, you're so wishy-washy and indecisive. I advise you not to marry a wife in the future. Just find a random girl and marry her." The young man chuckled and didn't refute. Just as he was about to leave the temple, Ning Yarrow said, "I'll send you to the stream first. Then I'll go northwest for a while to prevent the old macaque from worrying about the safety of the little girl. Not long after I left the bamboo forest, I didn't find any trace of you. I gave up the chase and turned back to the town." Chen Pingan thought about it and didn't refuse. The young man and the girl ran to the stream together. The girl's breathing was like a great river. The water was deep and the undercurrent was surging. The young man's breathing was like a stream, thin and long. The atmosphere was different. Ning Yarrow couldn't help but ask, "Will the wooden bow's arrowhead really work if you smear that herb on it?" The young man replied, "It's useful on a 200-pound wild boar anyway. It should work on the old macaque too." Ning Yarrow didn't say anything else. The 2 of them approached the stream, which was where the young man with straw sandals had come ashore. The young man and the girl unleashed their strength almost at the same time. They leaped up high and jumped to the opposite bank. The girl held her scabbard and slowed down after landing. The young man sprinted, jumped across the river, and ran after landing. He did everything in one breath and brushed past the girl in an instant. Chen Pingan was about to turn his head when the girl said, "Go to the town first. Don't worry about me." The young man continued to move forward. He turned his head and reminded her as he ran, "I'll take a detour and pick a secluded alley to enter the town. I might be a little late." Ning Yarrow nodded. After Chen Pingan's figure disappeared, she stopped holding her sword and began to walk slowly to the west. Not long after, the girl stopped and squinted her eyes to look upstream into the distance. A tall and sturdy figure suddenly shot towards the north bank from the big rock in the stream and landed more than 20 steps in front of the girl with an overbearing aura. The old macaque was puzzled. He did not sense the young man's hidden aura around him. He glanced at the white scabbard sword at the girl's waist and asked with a smile, "Young lady, you were the one who caused trouble at Fortune Street, weren't you?" The girl held her sword and saber hilts in silence. The old macaque asked curiously, "Young lady, although you've been hiding on the way to the town, I know you're not simple. You're definitely not the 2 good-for-nothings from Clearwind City and Old Dragon City. However, I'm curious. What's the grudge between us? Why do you have to do this? Or is there a grudge between your clan and Zhengyang Mountain?" Ning Yarrow did not say anything. She unsheathed her sword and saber and flashed away. Her narrow saber arrived first and slashed at the head of Zhengyang Mountain's guardian patriarch. The old macaque casually raised his hand and forcefully deflected the saber's edge with his arm. The girl used the momentum to spin her body and swept her sword horizontally at the old macaque's neck. The old macaque also used his arm to forcefully deflect the sword's edge. Since the girl's first 2 moves had failed, she did not get close to the old macaque. Instead, she kept a distance from him and walked slowly. After the old macaque appraised the sharpness of the 2 weapons with his unparalleled body, he completely ignored the bloody groove on the outside of his arm. He said with a smile, "Your weapons are really good. I can tell with a single glance that you're a disciple of a 1,000-year-old clan on the mountain, or a direct disciple of a first-rate wealthy clan at the foot of the mountain. I almost thought you were another sword cultivator from the Wind Thunder Garden hiding in the dark." The old macaque moved along with the girl's seemingly careless footsteps. He shifted his gaze along with her and said in a deep voice, "Young lady, I know you won't give up even if you suffer a setback. I'll give you one last chance. I'll let you tell me your clan's background. If you're killed by me after that, Xingyang Mountain won't admit their mistake. They won't care where you're from or who your master is." Ning Yarrow turned a deaf ear to that. She was still searching for the old macaque's real weakness. After all, she was not the vassal king of Dali who had touched the threshold of the 10th realm. She could not take on a mountain-moving ape head-on. The old macaque, who thought he had already given in too much, sneered. "Since you don't know what's good for you, I'll let you be. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,